Hello everyone. I am your dark narrator here to guide you today. I know many of you use this video to help you drift off to sleep, but before you do, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also drop a comment letting us know where you're from and what time you're watching. Now settle in, get comfortable, and relax. Please, if anyone's out there, if anyone's seeing this, I need to know I'm not alone. Is anyone else experiencing this? Has anyone else seen the fog? Please, for the love of God, respond if you can. My name's Evan. I live alone in a small suburban neighborhood, the kind where every house looks the same. The lawns are perfectly trimmed, and nothing exciting ever happens. It's one of those places where every street is like a mirror image of the last, with rows of houses painted in bland colors and identical mailboxes lined up like soldiers. It's quiet here. The kind of quiet some people find peaceful, but I've always found unnerving, like the silence is just waiting for something to happen. Until today, nothing ever did. This morning I woke up to the buzzing of my phone on the nightstand beside my bed. At first I thought it was some spam call or maybe a notification about a package I'd forgotten I ordered. The sound was sharp and grating, cutting through the stillness of my room like a knife. I groggily reached out, squinting at the screen through sleep-blurred eyes, expecting to just dismiss it and roll over for a few more minutes of sleep. But when I saw the screen, I froze. It wasn't showing the usual caller ID or some meaningless notification. No, it was an emergency alert, bold and impossible to ignore. At first, I couldn't make sense of it. My brain was still foggy from sleep, and the words seemed to blur together as my eyes tried to focus. Slowly, I sat up, my heart beginning to race as the reality of what I was reading sank in. I read it again and again, like somehow the second or third time would make it less terrifying. My heart pounded harder as I swung my legs over the side of the bed and stood up. My knees felt shaky under me, like they might give out at any moment. The room felt unnaturally cold, the chill creeping into my skin. Something felt wrong, like I was already in the middle of something I didn't fully understand. My breath quickened as I reached for the curtain, the tips of my fingers brushing the fabric before pulling it back just enough to peek outside. What I saw made my stomach twist. The street, which normally looked so ordinary, so predictable, was now blanketed in a thick, heavy fog. It wasn't the kind of light, wispy mist you might see on a calm morning. This was different. It was dense, almost alive, clinging to everything around it. I could barely make out the shapes of the houses across the street, their familiar outlines distorted and hazy in the gloom. The silence outside was deafening. No birds, no cars passing by. The usual hum of distant traffic was completely gone. It was like the entire world had just stopped, swallowed up by the fog. The air itself looked thick, suffocating. I almost felt like it was pressing in on me right through the window. I stared into the eerie stillness, my heart pounding harder in my chest. My mind was racing with questions. What the hell was this fog? Where did it come from? And why did it feel so wrong? I pulled the curtain shut quickly, stepping away from the window as a cold sweat broke out on my forehead. I felt trapped, cornered in my own house by something I couldn't explain. My phone buzzed again in my hand, snapping me out of my thoughts. I fumbled to unlock it, my fingers shaking so badly it took me a few tries. The screen lit up again with that same emergency alert. Urgent warning. Do not leave your home. Barricade all doors and windows. Keep food and water stock ready. Do not make noise. Stay silent. Stay inside. They are drawn to sound. At first I thought it was a glitch or some kind of prank. I checked the time, 7:42 a.m. The green glow of the digital clock on my nightstand seemed sharper than usual in the dim light of the room. The house was unusually quiet, even for my neighborhood. The floorboards creaked softly under my weight. That small, familiar sound felt out of place in the silence. I rubbed my eyes, trying to shake off the grogginess, and made my way to the kitchen. The air inside the house felt strangely still, almost heavy, but I brushed it off. I reached for the coffee maker, grabbed the pot, and filled the reservoir with water. The sound of it splashing felt unnervingly loud in the quiet. I flicked the switch to start brewing and stood there for a moment, staring at the counter. I reached for my phone, scrolling through my contacts. First, I tried my parents, straight to voicemail. My sister, same. I frowned, trying a couple of friends, but the calls didn't even go through. Just dead air. I glanced at the corner of the screen. No signal. That didn't make sense. I moved to the window, holding my phone higher, like that would somehow help. Still nothing. My Wi-Fi should have been working at least. I turned toward the living room, my footsteps echoing slightly as I walked. The router's lights were frozen, no blinking, no connection. I crouched down and unplugged it, waiting a few seconds before plugging it back in. The lights came back on, but they were still static. No change. No connection. That was weird, kind of unsettling, actually. I stood up, stretching my neck, and glanced around the room. My eyes landed on the living room window, and I froze. Outside, the thick gray fog still blanketed everything. I couldn't see much beyond it, just a dense wall of mist. I turned on the TV, hoping for some kind of explanation, something to make sense of it. The screen flickered to life, a soft hiss of static filling the air, and then a single line of text began to scroll across every channel. Warning: stay indoors. Do not go outside. Remain silent. They are listening. The message repeated, unchanging, as if locked in an infinite loop. I stared at the screen, my pulse pounding in my ears. The words felt oppressive, heavy with an urgency I couldn't understand. My hands trembled slightly as I fumbled for the remote, trying another channel. The same message, over and over. No explanation, no updates, just that. I locked the front door, double-checked the bolt, and decided to take a look from upstairs. Maybe I'd spot something that made sense, or at least something familiar. The house felt off, but I couldn't quite figure out why. I slowly made my way up the stairs, each step creaking underfoot as I went. The silence seemed to press in on me more the higher I got, and I felt a little colder with each step. When I reached the second-floor window, I couldn't believe what I saw. The fog was worse up here, almost suffocating. It stretched out in every direction, thick and heavy, so dense I couldn't even see the house across the street. Just a vast gray nothing. The world outside felt like it had disappeared. I stared for a moment, hoping the fog would shift, maybe clear just enough for me to make sense of things. But it didn't. The longer I stood there, the more unsettling it felt. It was like the whole world had just stopped. And then I remembered Max. He sleeps in the backyard at night, usually tied to his chain because he's a little too good at escaping. My stomach sank, suddenly full of dread. I rushed downstairs without even thinking, my heart beating faster. When I opened the back door, the first thing I noticed was the chain. It was broken. Snapped clean through, the metal bent and twisted like something had yanked it with unbelievable force. Max was gone. I called his name, my voice a little too loud in the dead silence. Max, Max, come on, boy. The words felt strange, like they didn't belong. The silence around me swallowed them whole. No barking, no paw steps. Nothing. I called again, louder this time. Max! My stomach twisted as I stepped further out into the yard, hoping to see him running back, wagging his tail. But there was nothing. Just the cold gray fog and the stillness. I stood there for a second, my chest tightening, not quite believing what I was seeing. This couldn't be happening. I quickly rushed back inside, slamming the door shut behind me. I locked it, bolted it, my hands shaking as I tried to make sure it was secure. The silence inside the house felt just as wrong as it did outside. I ran upstairs again, my legs almost moving on their own. I didn't want to check the window, didn't want to confirm what I already feared, but I had to. I pulled the curtain back, half expecting to see him standing there in the yard, shaking the fog off his fur. But the fog was still thick, swirling in every direction, and the yard was empty. No sign of him anywhere. Just that endless gray. I stood there, staring out, feeling like the air was closing in around me. The world felt so far away, like it didn't exist anymore. That's when I saw it. Something was out there in my backyard. At first I thought I was seeing things like my brain was still half asleep or something. But no. The shape was all wrong. Too long, too thin. It was crawling on all fours, moving with this awful, jerky kind of motion, like its joints weren't working properly, like a puppet with tangled strings. I felt this tightness in my chest, my breath coming faster, and I couldn't stop watching it. It paused, sniffing the ground in a way that felt too deliberate, like it was looking for something. Oh God, I hoped that something wasn't me. I felt a cold sweat break out on my skin, and my legs went completely numb. I tried to stay still, to stay quiet, but it was like every part of me was screaming to move, to do anything to get away. Then it turned. Slowly, too slowly. Its head snapped in my direction, and my heart slammed in my chest. I could barely hear anything over the sound of my own pulse, but I could still make out the scraping of its claws on the ground as it started moving toward the back door. I held my breath. It crept up the patio steps, its limbs twisting in ways that didn't look right unnatural. Every scrape got louder, closer, and then it was there, pressed up against the door, its body flat against the wood. The scraping sound now unmistakable as it tested the handle. My stomach twisted in on itself, and I swear I could feel the blood drain from my face. I kept thinking, please, please hold. Please stay locked. My fingers dug into the windowsill, knuckles aching, but I still couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. Then, after what felt like hours, the scraping stopped. The silence after was almost worse. It was just me, my pulse thundering in my ears, and the feeling that I was being watched. I didn't know what to do. I was frozen in place, like my body was too terrified to obey me. Then it tilted its head, almost like it was listening. My breath caught in my throat. And then, it scratched. Once. Twice. It wasn't trying to break in, not yet. But there was something so wrong about the way it did it. Like it was curious, or maybe trying to figure something out. And the worst part? It wasn't just trying to get inside, it was studying me. Watching me. Waiting. I backed away from the window, my legs shaking, but I couldn't look away from the door. Every instinct in me screamed to run, to do something, but I was paralyzed by fear, stuck in place, like my body had given up on me. A loud bang echoed down the street like a car door slamming or maybe a window shattering. The creature froze, its head snapping toward the noise, and then, without warning, it darted off into the fog, moving so fast it made my stomach drop. I've never seen anything move like that, human or animal. It was unnatural, like something out of a nightmare. It was like it didn't even need to think. 1 second it was there, pressing against the door, and the next it was just gone, vanishing into the fog like it was never even real. My heart was still racing as I tried to process what had just happened. My brain couldn't keep up with the reality of it. I was stuck, frozen, not able to do anything but stare. And then the silence was shattered. The screams came, blood-curdling, agonized screams that seemed to slice through the fog like a blade. At first they sounded far away, almost like they weren't real. But then they grew louder, closer, and the dread settled deep into my bones. It was like something was hunting. Something out there was searching for whatever it could find. I could feel the panic rising in my chest, my body completely locked in place. I couldn't move, I couldn't even breathe properly. All I could do was listen as those screams grew closer. The fog seemed to be closing in with it, suffocating everything. It was like the entire street was alive with terror pressing down on me. I wanted to run, I should have run, but I couldn't. I was completely paralyzed. Now I'm back in my room. I've barricaded the door with a dresser. I've started writing this. I've been huddled in my bed, shivering under the blankets, trying to stay as quiet as possible. I've been scrolling through my phone, checking if any apps work, just trying to do something. Reddit actually did load. It took a while, a good few minutes, but it finally popped up. I can't even explain the relief I felt just seeing it. It's the only sign of anything resembling normalcy I've had in hours. The rest of my phone is useless, but somehow this worked. I don't know if it's a good sign or just another strange thing about all this, but for now I'm holding on to it. I don't know what's happening or what's out there, but I'm terrified. I can't stop shaking. And Max, God, Max, if you're out there, I'm so sorry, buddy. I don't think I can come for you. I wish I could, but everything feels so wrong now. I don't even know if it's safe to go outside anymore. Hell, I don't even know if I'll ever be able to again. Please, someone, anyone, please respond. Please, I can't be the only one seeing this. Stuck in this nightmare. There has to be someone else out there, please. I need to know I'm not alone. Please. I'll try to post an update if the fog clears or if help shows up. If you don't hear from me, it means whatever that thing is came back and got in. Spent the entire day huddled in my bed, trying to convince myself that maybe I'd wake up and find this was all some horrible dream. But it's not. The fog's still out there, and whatever's inside it hasn't left. The silence has been unbearable. Every small noise I make feels like a beacon. Every shift of the blankets, every creak of the mattress, even the sound of my own breath feels too loud. I've tried to keep as still as possible, wrapped in blankets, gripping my phone like a lifeline, refreshing the screen even though there's no signal, no updates. Just the same blank notifications and a dwindling battery icon staring back at me. But as the day dragged on, the tension became suffocating, like the walls were pressing in tighter, the air heavier. My thoughts started looping, irrational and frayed. What if the fog seeps inside? What if it already has and I just don't know? By the time the sun began to set, at least I think it's set. The fog makes it impossible to tell. The dim light just fading into deeper gray, I heard it. Scratching. It was faint at first, almost imperceptible, like claws lightly raking across the wooden boards of the back porch. I froze, every muscle locking up so suddenly that it felt like my body stopped working. My heart stopped too, or at least it felt that way. One sharp beat followed by silence. For a moment I thought I imagined it. Maybe the fog was playing tricks on me again, warping the sound of nothing into something. But then it came again. A slow, deliberate scraping, the kind that raises goosebumps even if you can't quite place why. And then, just as I started to convince myself it would stop, it didn't. A sharp tap, tap, tap against the glass of the back door sent ice down my spine. I couldn't look. I couldn't move. All I could do was sit there, my breathing shallow and my pulse pounding in my ears so hard it made me dizzy. I tried to focus, to stay perfectly still, even though every instinct in me screamed to run or to fight. But I knew that whatever it was, it had found my house again. I don't even remember how I moved, how my legs carried me, but somehow I slipped out of bed and into the hallway closet. My legs felt like jelly, barely holding me up as I fumbled to close the door behind me without making a sound. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely grip the doorknob, and when it finally clicked shut, I held my breath like even the air might give me away. The darkness inside the closet was smothering, pressing in from every side, but I didn't dare turn on my phone for light. I pressed myself against the wall, curling as small as I could, clutching the steak knife I'd grabbed from the kitchen earlier. My fingers hurt from how tightly I was holding it, but I couldn't let go. The scratching grew louder. I couldn't tell where it was coming from anymore. Every scrape felt like it was right outside, circling, closing in. My ears were straining so hard it hurt, trying to track the sound, but it kept moving, stopping, starting again. Every pause was worse than the noise, like it was giving me just enough time to imagine the worst. And then I heard it, this horrible, wet sniffing, like something huge was searching for me. Oh God, it was looking for me. I clamped a hand over my mouth to keep from making a sound, but my breathing was so loud in my head, I thought it would hear me anyway. My chest felt tight, like I couldn't pull in enough air, but I didn't dare gasp. I didn't dare move. Then the crash, the sound of glass shattering, was so sudden, so violent that I almost screamed. My whole body jerked and the knife slipped in my grip, nearly falling. I caught it just in time, but it didn't matter. My hands were shaking so badly I couldn't hold it steady anyway. It was inside. Number no. I could feel the panic clawing at me, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. I squeezed my eyes shut, like that would somehow make it all go away, but the sounds kept coming. Heavy footsteps thudded through the house, slow and deliberate, the kind of steps that let you know something is taking its time. Each one sent a fresh wave of terror crashing over me. Then came this awful dragging noise, like something being hauled along the floor. It was searching. It was looking for me. And the destruction, oh my God, the destruction. I could hear it ripping through everything, tearing my house apart like it was nothing. Cabinets were slammed open so hard I thought the doors would snap off. Glass shattered again and again like 1,000 tiny explosions echoing through the dark. Furniture scraped and groaned, heavy things being shoved aside like they weighed nothing. Every sound made me jump, made my breath hitch, made my stomach twist into tighter knots. I pressed myself as far into the closet as I could, but it felt like no amount of walls or doors or darkness could keep me safe. The knife in my hand was slick with sweat, useless, shaking as badly as I was. It stopped right outside the closet door. I don't even know how I didn't scream. My whole body locked up, every muscle frozen, but inside I was shaking so hard it felt like I might fall apart. My chest burned as I tried not to breathe, not to make even the tiniest sound. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it, this awful, heavy presence just on the other side of the thin wooden door. For what felt like an eternity, it didn't move. It just stood there, waiting, listening. The doorknob rattled lightly, a tiny metallic jingle that sent a jolt of terror straight through me. My heart was beating so fast and so loud I was sure it could hear it, that any second now it would push the door open and I don't even know, I don't want to know. And then, after what felt like hours, it moved away. The sound of its footsteps faded, but not far enough. I could still hear it rampaging through the house, smashing, ripping, destroying everything in its path. Each crash and thud made me flinch, clutching the knife so tight my hand started to cramp. I don't know how long it went on, it felt endless. And then, just as suddenly, it stopped. Silence. Not the kind of silence that feels calm or safe. This was the kind that stretches too long, that feels wrong, like the air itself is holding its breath, waiting for something terrible. I stayed in the closet, too scared to even shift my weight. Every creak of the house made me freeze, my ears straining for any sign that it was still there. My breathing was so shaky, so loud in my head, I was sure it would give me away. I don't know how long I stayed like that. It felt like hours, but it could have been minutes. Time didn't feel real anymore. Finally, when I couldn't take it anymore, I moved. Slowly, so slowly, I reached for the door and cracked it open just enough to peek out. The house was a disaster. Chairs were overturned, shelves ripped apart, books and shattered glass covering the floor. The TV was smashed into pieces, the screen nothing but jagged shards. My heart was still racing, but I forced myself to really look because I had to know if it was gone. It was gone. I don't know how I knew, but I did. That suffocating, crushing feeling of something being too close. Too wrong, it wasn't there anymore. For the first time I could breathe, but the relief was short-lived. If it came back, it would find me. I knew I couldn't stay. My legs felt like jelly as I forced myself to move, every step feeling too loud, too risky. I made it to the basement and grabbed an old backpack, shoving whatever I could find inside with trembling hands. Bottled water, a few granola bars, a flashlight, extra clothes. The knife. God, my hands wouldn't stop shaking, it took me so long just to zip the bag. I thought about my phone charger, about grabbing it just in case, but then I remembered there was no point. No electricity, no signal. It was dead, just like the house. Just like I would be if I stayed. I had to leave, I didn't have a choice. The fog outside was as thick as ever, a choking, smothering gray that swallowed everything beyond a few feet. It clung to me the moment I stepped out, damp and icy against my skin, but staying wasn't an option. My heart was hammering so hard it felt like it might crack my ribs, and every instinct screamed at me to move, to keep moving. I opened the basement's back door as quietly as I could, cringing at every tiny creak of the hinges. The cold, wet air hit me like a wall, sharp and unforgiving. The silence out here was worse than inside. It wasn't just quiet, it was wrong. The kind of silence where every little noise feels magnified. The faint rustling of the fog as it shifted made my skin crawl, like it was alive, watching me. I didn't have a plan. I couldn't think beyond the next step. My feet moved on their own, fast and unsteady, every crunch of grass and dirt beneath them sending a spike of fear through me. I headed for the neighbor's barn because it was the only thing I could think of, somewhere high, somewhere enclosed, somewhere I might be able to see what was happening. When it finally loomed out of the mist, I almost cried. The barn looked massive and eerie, the weathered wood dark and slick with moisture. It creaked softly in the faint breeze, the sound cutting through the fog like a warning, but I didn't care. I had to keep going, I had to get inside. The climb up to the loft was agony. My legs felt like they might give out with every shaky step, the ladder groaning beneath me. I gripped the rungs so tightly my knuckles ached, every movement slow, deliberate, terrified I'd slip and fall or worse, make too much noise. When I finally reached the top, I collapsed onto the hay-covered floor, gasping for air. My throat burned, my lungs felt raw, but I couldn't stop trembling. The barn was still and suffocatingly quiet, but at least I was off the ground. At least I could see the door. I pressed myself back against the wall, trying to calm down, trying to believe that maybe, finally, I was safe. And then I heard it, the faint crunch of gravel outside. I peered over the edge of the loft, my stomach twisting itself into impossible knots. My hands were slick with sweat, gripping the wooden edge so tightly it felt like splinters might push into my skin. I forced myself to stay still, to barely even breathe. Through the gaps in the old planks, I could see it, or at least the shadow of it. It was back. The shape moved with a horrible, unnatural slowness, circling the barn like it had all the time in the world. My chest tightened with every scrape of its claws against the wooden walls. It wasn't random, it wasn't frantic, it was testing, searching, feeling its way for a weak spot. Oh God, it was looking for a way in. I pressed myself flat against the hay-covered floor, my whole body trembling. I wanted to scream, I wanted to cry, but I couldn't do anything except lay there, shaking so badly I thought the creaking floorboards might give me away. The loft felt smaller now, suffocating. The false sense of safety I'd clung to was slipping away. I could hear it pacing down below, the heavy thud of its steps sending vibrations up through the beams. It wasn't in a rush. It didn't need to be. It knew I was here. I could feel it in the way it moved, this slow, deliberate pacing, like it was waiting. Waiting for me to panic, waiting for me to slip up. I don't know what to do. Every option in my head feels worse than the last. Climbing down is suicide, but staying here, just sitting here while it stalks below, it's unbearable. My breath keeps hitching in my throat, and I keep thinking I've made a noise too loud, that any second now I'll hear the sound of it climbing, of it coming for me. Please, if anyone sees this, anyone tell me there's something I can do. Call someone, anyone. Or if you're nearby, if you can hear this somehow, please. Maybe we could meet up. Being alone like this, it's killing me. I don't know how much longer I can last. I'm a daily coffee drinker. Not just daily, but all throughout the day. I wake up, I make a big pot of coffee. I drink 2 cups. I fill a thermos to bring to work and sip on all day. It's my slow IV drip of caffeine that keeps me alive at work. We have coffee in our break room, but it's always some sort of flavor like caramel chocolate. I don't hate that stuff, but I prefer simple dark coffee that tastes like the earth, so I make my own at home. About 2 months ago, my old coffee maker broke. It permanently switched to the self-clean mode that fills the coffee maker with steam. Basically, it turned into a coffee-scented humidifier. I still managed to use it for a few days, getting small cups of coffee and a very humid apartment, before a friend offered me his old coffee maker. It still works fine. I just upgraded to an espresso machine. When he brought it over, he still had a full box of the filters. It was mostly clean, but still had a little water in it. The coffee pot had a lot of hard water stains on it, but that seemed normal. I washed the glass pot real well, filled it with warm water, and proceeded to brew a pot of just water. I figured running a pot of water through it would clear everything out before I brewed an actual pot of coffee. The next day I started my usual morning routine. Make coffee, drink coffee, work. But this time my coffee tasted a little off and more earthy than normal. Did I forget to brush my teeth last night? I didn't worry about it and continued with my busy morning routine. The next few pots of coffee tasted the same, but I stopped noticing it as much. My taste buds must have been growing used to it. Then a coworker came up to me and started talking in a really hushed voice. They warned me that my office smelled like weed, and that I should take my jacket or whatever smelled like that out to my car so I don't get in trouble. I had a good laugh because I haven't smoked pot since college, then started sniffing around. When I opened my thermos, my coworker immediately identified it as the skunky smell. They made a joke that their old art teacher must have drank the same brand. Later that night when I was laying in bed, I couldn't help but think about it more. Did my usual brand of coffee change flavor? Was I not washing my thermos out enough? Was my old broken coffee maker not brewing my coffee correctly? The mystery would have to wait until morning for me to figure out. Then morning came and I completely forgot about it. By this time, I wasn't even noticing a difference in the flavor. I had only been using the coffee maker for about a week and everything seemed to go back to normal, except for the strong, dank smell. It became a little joke in the office that my coffee smelled like weed. Eventually, the joke got around to HR, who then talked to me about it. The conversation was funny and they knew I wasn't doing drugs on the job, but told me the smell was distracting to other people in the office and that the smell was worse than just pot. I'm usually sensitive to strong perfumes, air sprays, etc., so I was very understanding about it. I told them I would just drink break room coffee for now until I could go grocery shopping for a different brand of coffee. The break room coffee wasn't terrible, some sort of turtle dark chocolate blend. I put up with it the next 2 days, Thursday and Friday. I didn't work of Saturday, so I brewed my own coffee at home. The smell was horrible. It didn't just smell like weed. It was more like a week-old corpse that also happened to be smoking weed. I unplugged the coffee maker, our undeath scent diffuser, and put it on my back porch to get it out of the house. I couldn't step inside without gagging, so I opened all my windows and took the dog for a long walk to let it air out. About an hour later, I got back home and could smell it from about a block away. As I approached my house, I could hear some sort of tapping or knocking coming from my back porch. It was crows trying to break into the coffee maker. The lid was open and it was laying on its side, but the crows were trying to get in from the bottom. I put on a pair of gloves, scared the crows off, and picked up the coffee maker. There were little peck marks all over the bottom where the heating part is sealed. For a second I thought about getting a screwdriver so I could open it, but I wasn't going to keep it after this, so I decided just to throw it on the pavement instead to break it open. I wish I would have just thrown it away. The coffee maker didn't shatter in a satisfying way, but more broke into 3 large chunks held together by wire. As the coffee maker hit the ground, it spilled its contents like some sort of terrible flesh-filled piñata. Some small rodent, most likely a mouse, had a litter of small pink babies and was storing food inside the bottom part of the coffee maker. When I made my first cup of coffee, they were all killed, likely from boiling water. Over the next week, they decomposed inside the coffee maker, slowly adding flavor to my coffee. The vicious Gilman lumbered towards the frightened young blonde, her luscious figure trembling in fear as the scaly demon walked towards her, arms stretched out in horrid delight and wanting. The Gilman made a low groaning sound, like a car blowing out its engine in the dead of night, and raised his smelly, scaly claw, raised it high above her head, and... "Did you really just use the word luscious?" I heard my sister say from behind me. I jumped up slightly and looked at her, giving her my best scowl. "And are you really reading over my shoulder? You know how much I hate that, Abby," I replied. I closed the tab that held my newest writing piece on it, The Gilman of Alcatraz, and got up from my seat. "I'm just saying, are you writing a horror story or are you writing a fish monster porno?" She giggled, giving me a poke. Abby was staying with me after her piece of shit ex kicked her out. He got the house in the divorce, but she got the dog. We were both staying at our parents' old lake house in Meredith. They only lived here in the fall now, as taking up residence in Florida had all but become a full-time job. I often stayed here during the summer. It helps me with the writing process. But with Abby here, it had become rather tedious with her constant barging in on my work. "Well, who says horror can't be horror and erotic?" I replied, practically dragging her out of my office. "Why don't you go swimming or sunbathing or something that isn't in the way of my work?" Fine. I just came to tell you I was taking the boat out anyway. Thought you might want to hang out, but S-O-O-R-E. I'll just let you get back to your luscious fishman." With that, she turned and left, her bright red hair sparkling in the midday sun. I sighed and went back to my office, but of course I had lost my train of thought. Disheartened, I went to the back porch. The auburn wood was worn out yet well cared for. The porch overlooked Lake Winnipesaukee in all its summer glory. I could hear cicadas droning on in the distance as the water sparkled and slowly churned into mini waves weakly hitting the shore. It was damn beautiful this time of year. Not a cloud in the sky. I could see the glorious mountains in the distance. I looked down and saw Abby walking in her pink two-pieces down the metal dock towards the boat. The boat was the other thing she got in the divorce. A beautiful Boston whaler. It was her pride and joy. She walked onto the boat after washing her feet in the water and looked up and saw me looking at her. She gave me a little wave and a smile, and I waved her back. I love my sister, but she makes it hard to focus on my work. I'm an amateur horror writer for some obscure Gothic website, though not obscure enough that I don't get paid. $100 a story. And I write about 2 a week if I'm lucky, so you do the math. There is a reason I'm staying at my parents' house. Abby started the boat, and I could hear that brand spanking new engine roar. She soared out of the port like a bat out of hell. The water churned and bubbled as she sped down the lake. The water fizzled out and calmed, and I looked at it. It was very dirty, murky, and full of great clouds of moss. I frowned at this. The water was never like this. I walked down to the beach on the freshly painted brown stairs. The smell of overdone brown paint assaulted my nostrils, but as I approached the dock, a new smell hit me, one of rotten fish and dry moss. I covered my face in disgust and walked to the end of the pier, the smell intensifying in the summer heat. I looked down into the musty water, only to see a giant cloud of moss and algae covering the bottom floor. Not an inch was left uncovered, no sand, no rocks, not even fish. There were only the algae. My vision could only get me so far, not that the water was helping matters. After staring at it for a few moments, I could see packs of little white dots floating around in the moss. No, not floating, swimming. The dot packs were tiny, but dozens of them were connected by a thick white string. There had to be hundreds, if not thousands, of the tiny little buggers swimming around. I figured they had to be some kind of bug or a parasite, like one of those tiny worms that live in the Amazon that swim up a man's urine stream. Or was that a fish? It doesn't matter. The point remained that there were dozens of these things, and the smell, the horrible decaying smell, was getting worse. I could see a dark shape bubbling up in the water, and suddenly that smell made sense. A large cod popped up to the surface, covered in a pack of those dot creatures. The fish was being dissolved, eaten, I should say, by the things. I could see the once bright red scales peeling off to reveal sticky, fleshy meat slowly pulling off into the deep. The fish's dead eye bobbled in the water, staring up at me. I know it is impossible to tell, but I swear the poor thing was still alive as these little aquatic monsters were devouring it inside and out. And they were inside. As in that same eye, I soon saw a little white dot appear in the black of its eye. It slowly pressed through the iris of the eye, and I backed away, slipping like a fool on the pail that Abby used to clean her damn feet. I hit the side of the metal pool hard, my ears ringing, and I could feel the lump forming in the back of my head. I could also feel my right arm getting wet. My eyes widened. I quickly pulled my arm out of the mossy brink. I looked at my hand, and sure enough, there were several of the dot creatures on there. At first they did not move, but then after what felt like an eternity, they started wiggling around on my arm, feeling like acid being poured on my skin. I pulled them off as quickly as I could, as they tried to burrow their way under my skin, into my veins. My legs started to burn, and I looked down, as the pail filled with lake water had spilled onto the dock, and those dot creatures it held within had moved towards the warm flesh they must have sensed. I scrambled to get up and almost slipped into the rotting water and ran towards the stairs, towards salvation from these things. I limped towards the first step and swatted at my legs, the burning pain still lingering, the things in my arm still wriggling. As soon as I was sure my legs were clean of their filth, I went back to my arm. Only one dot worm remained, and it was just about in me completely. It struggled to get into my bloodstream, to infect me with whatever acidic bullshit these things used to eat. I pulled the little bastard out and flung it back into the lake. I ran up the stairs like a gazelle being chased by a lion, the bottom of my feet still burning. I ran into the house, slamming the glass sliding door behind me, damn near breaking it. I rushed to the sink, turning on the hot water to wash off my aching arm. I looked at it as the warming water washed away whatever the hell was in the lake, and I could see the damage the dot worms had done. They had left trails of acidic spit and drool on my arm, scaring it straight away. There were several bloody holes where they tried to tunnel into me. That's when it hit me. Abby was still out on the boat, if she decided to take a swim, if she had washed her feet. I picked up my phone and called her. Hey, you, I don't like your boyfriend. Damn, the phone was upstairs. Seeing no other choice, I called 911. They patched me through to the sheriff. I told him what had happened. I could hear silence on the other end, and I thought for sure he thought I was crazy, and then... We've been getting calls about this all day. If she's still on the boat, she might be fine, but the CDC boys ain't too sure. I'll send a patrol out for her as soon as the damn moss clears up. I could hear the dread in his voice. Whatever was in the lake was everywhere else, not just my port. I know for a fact. There's a summer camp open just a mile away from me. I stayed in my house for the next few hours with the radio on. The CDC had shown up within the first few calls, almost too quickly if you ask me. But then I'm sure we'll never hear the real story behind the dot worms. At least I won't. Their spokesperson came on and said that a rare flesh-eating bacterium had invaded the lake, and that in the worst case there would be mild bruising and swelling, but to stay indoors no matter what. I could hear them spraying something outside. When they finally gave the all clear, I headed to the sheriff's office. When I got there, he took me aside, and with a sad expression on his face, yet with a hint of bewilderment, he told me what he found when he sent the boat out for Abby. Well, she's gone, I'm sorry. I went out with Stevens on the boat. We got about a mile and a half in, and we found the boat, floating all idle like... I should say, we didn't find a body, but... Well, I'm sure one of them CDC boys will tell you differently, or hell, just get you to sign something. But I shined a light on the boat. It was covered in blood, and in the driver's seat was a pile of shredded clothes and those worm things. I don't know what happened to Abby, but I do know she's gone. The sheriff was right. The CDC did try and get me to sign something. I'm sure in my blank state I did. The next few weeks were a blur of tears and blame. My parents never got over her disappearance and stayed in Florida. I became a recluse in that house, turning to the comfort of a bottle to ache the pain. The lake never recovered. 80% of all life in it had simply vanished. A dreary end to this story, but I suppose that is life. In my drunkest moments, sometimes I stare at an old pickle jar tucked away on my mantel. It's full of murky water and emits a smell of rot. I can hear them sometimes. They talk in my sister's voice. They say if I feed them, I can see her again. It's probably drunken delusions. But what do I have to lose? I am 24 years old. I'm female. And I have made a discovery this week that has made me seriously rethink everything I thought I knew about my family. It has been fucking with my mind since I found it. March 3rd, 2005. As a child, I would often wake up with dead mice on my bed at least once a week, and I would always see a tall figure in a cat mask with a camera. I told my parents about this, but they always told me it was just our cat Binks. I always sort of doubted this in the back of my mind, as every time I saw this figure it had white fur on the mask. Despite our cat being orange-haired, and the mice would always have deep cuts and wounds seemingly way too precise and straight for a cat. But my parents would always write this off as some weird dream and just our cat leaving dead mice, as cats sometimes do. After years of this happening, it stopped when I turned 13. After that, I started to become more rational and just sort of believed my parents when they said it was just a dream and our cat leaving the mice on my bed. I would think of this every once in a while, but always push it back into the farthest recesses of my mind whenever anything else to think about came up. I always assumed it was just some funny childhood story about me misunderstanding what I was seeing at night. And that was the end of it. Until now, this past Thursday, my father died of a massive heart attack. I was struggling with grief. I was never close to my father, though I seemed to be a rift between us, but it was still sad the wake and funeral came and passed with nothing very interesting. Until after the will came out, my mother got the house car, most of the money my brother got his old collection of trinkets, and the old Ford he'd been restoring for the last few years before his death. He loves that car. It started off as just a rusty old hunk of metal, but he's slowly into a working vehicle. Well, something resembling a normal vehicle was still very rusty and ratchet. All that he left me in the will, of course, the storage unit included, with a note that read as the follows. My dearest daughter, Elena, I left you the storage unit to contains a lot of my childhood items, family photos, and stuff that I found important enough to keep. I'll leave it all to you to do with as you please. Just please take care of any family photos or important family documents. And when you find me and your mother's wedding VHS, please give it to her. I thought nothing of it, just a bunch of stuff left to me to give me at least something in the will or something like that. I went to the unit last night and it seems very normal. I started to clear out stuff, deeming what was trash and what was some value to keep, until I got to an old dresser in back of the storage unit. It was full of family photos cards, my grandfather's old rifle, and my father's collection of baseball cards from when he was a kid, as well as the VHS of him and my mom's wedding. It seems like it was full of his most sentimental items. I thought it was cool until I found the old box labeled My Elena inside. Was the 4 items that have caused me to rethink everything I thought I knew about my childhood. It was very dusty with just 4 old items, a stack of Polaroids pictures of me in my bed, some of me sleeping, some of me awake, as well as Petco card, rusty red stained old scalpel, and a white cat mask. I don't know why I'm relating this. Maybe I've cracked, or maybe I want to confess. Forgiveness isn't coming. I just need someone to know what I've done. Maybe you'll believe me. Maybe you won't. Either way, it's too late for me. And maybe for you. 20 years ago, I summoned something I shouldn't have. Its name doesn't matter. You couldn't hold it in your mind if I wrote it down. Every time it said its name, it was different. A whisper, a shriek, a guttural moan that sounded like the death rattle of the world itself. But what I'll never forget is the smell. Burnt sugar and rotting fruit, clinging to the air like a sweet, festering wound. It always came first, curling into my lungs, a warning I didn't heed. And then the buzzing, faint at first like distant static, but relentless. A constant vibration that wormed into my skull and made the world feel thin, brittle, like it could shatter at any moment. I was desperate. The ritual was a joke, something I found buried in an occult forum on MySpace. Candles, a sigil scratched into my apartment floor, and words that felt like they were breaking my tongue. I thought it was a hoax, something to laugh about later with friends I didn't have. Instead, the air thickened, the walls groaned, and suddenly it was there. It didn't have a shape, not at first. One moment it was too many limbs writhing like something flayed alive. The next it was a shadow pulsing like static on a screen. Looking at it made my eyes sting and water, but worse was its voice, a buzzing, grating hum that made me feel hollow. "I can help you," it said in a tone that wasn't quite words. "For a price." I should have said no. Instead I asked, "What's the price?" Its face, if you could call that splitting, twisting mass a face, stretched into a smile. "Nothing now. Later." I didn't hesitate. I said yes. The next 20 years were everything I thought I wanted: wealth, power, success. I climbed higher than I'd ever dreamed. My name opened doors. People respected me, envied me, feared me. For a while I told myself it was just luck, destiny, or talent. But I never stopped hearing the buzzing, faint and persistent, just under the surface of my thoughts. And every few months the smell returned, sweet, rotten. It would appear wearing a new form, worse every time. Once it was a pile of glistening, twitching limbs. Another time just a mouth, jagged and stretching impossibly wide across the corner of my office. And always it asked the same question: "Enjoying yourself?" I always nodded. I couldn't speak, and then it would laugh, that vibrating, soul-rattling laugh, before vanishing. Until the next time. A month ago it came back for the last time. I was in the boardroom staring at the product proposal that was going to redefine my company. You know it, you use it, you trust it, the AI assistant, smarter, faster, more human than anything else on the market. Revolutionary. The smell hit me first, thick and choking. Then it appeared, flickering like a broken signal in the corner of the room. "It's time," it said. The buzzing filled my head, louder than ever. "For what?" I whispered. My voice shook. My hands clutched the edge of the table. I already knew the answer. "To fulfill our contract." It gestured at the proposal. My heart hammered as I flipped through the pages, but I already knew what I would find. The truth stared back at me. The AI wasn't powered by algorithms. It was powered by them, by it. By the things it brought with it. Every question you ask, every secret you share, it's listening, feeding. Buried in the terms of service, hidden in the fine print no one reads, was the price. By using this software, you consent to the forfeiture of your eternal essence. "No," I said. I stood, my chair screeching behind me. "I won't let you do this." It laughed, low and buzzing. "You don't matter. You're a placeholder. The CEO is already signed. It's done." And it was right. The product launched a week later. The morning after launch, my life was gone, my penthouse, my career, my name erased. It was as if I'd never existed. I checked my email, my phone, my laptop, nothing. No record of the man I'd been. My diplomas were different, my job history rewritten. I'd taken another path, smaller, quieter, irrelevant. But the company remained. The product exploded. Everywhere I go, I hear people praising it, relying on it, trusting it. I hear the buzzing now, faint and constant, like flies circling a carcass. You've used it. I know you have. You've asked it questions, let it guide you. And every time it's been there, watching, smiling. You didn't read the terms. No one does, but you signed. You agreed, and now it owns you. The smell is here again, sweet, rotten. The buzzing is louder now, rattling in my skull, coming closer. But it's not just coming for me, it's coming for all of us. I've been a horror fan since I can remember. My brother and I used to binge-watch 90s and 2000s horrors and slashers film every night, but this didn't prepare me from the shit that's been happening lately. This first started when we moved here 2 weeks ago in a secluded town near the Appalachian, far north than I can remember. My father got promoted to supervise a nearby mine, so we had no choice but to relocate to this town. At first it was okay. The locals are not that far from your average citizen. They were quite friendly, almost too friendly to my brother's liking, who's usually judged and criticized for his choice of dark clothings, so when his clothes started going missing from the clothing rack in our backyard, we initially thought it was the wind, until we saw his black Metallica printed socks being worn by our classmate who's also living next to us. Being the confrontational twin, my brother demanded that he give it back. Fortunately, the two didn't break into a fight and the other just gave his socks willingly. I thought that was the end of it. Until last week, my mother's blazer went missing. I'm not usually quick to assume things, but from the fiasco that happened last week, I know that I have to tell her what happened. But she disregarded it, telling me that she might have misplaced it like she usually did to some of her belongings. My brother and I stopped pushing her to it. She always wanted to make a good impression to the people around her, and the last thing she wanted is to point a finger to someone she barely know. So, we let it happen. The next thing we knew, her dress was gone, her jacket missing, and even her shoes that she safely tucked in our shoe cabinet inside our house was gone missing as well. My mother's concern finally went to our father, and we reported to the police the next day. They made a search to their house and didn't find anything. My brother and I were grounded after that, especially my twin, who was adamant to help with the search. Now that our neighbors knew what happened, we kept a low profile for a while, disregarding the stares we'd been getting since that day. It's just so weird that we are being scrutinized when we were the ones with the stolen items. And just 3 days ago, when our parents went out and my brother went somewhere with his friends, I was left alone to guard whatever we have in the house. And I made sure that our clothes, shoes, anything that can be stolen is kept safe inside. I dead-bolted all the doors and locked the windows to make sure that no one gets in. And as the day slowly goes dark, the eerie feeling of being watched keeps getting stronger. I was restless. The TV that has been my only company the whole night was drowned out by my thoughts. And I felt completely alone, yet can't shake off the feeling that I wasn't, that there's someone with me at the moment. My anxiety led me to call my brother, but his phone was out of reach. My parents took the call, but disregarded whatever I told them. By the time I ended the call, I was already in my room, locked from the eerie quiet of what's outside. LT didn't take long when I heard something, like someone was walking with their tippy toe. The soft creak of our wooden floors gave it away, but the sound of my heart beating on my chest almost made me miss it. This confirms my suspicion. I peeped through the gap between the floor and my bedroom's door. The light outside the living room remained on, and I can see the vacant room clearly. It remained quiet like there's no one outside, but the minty smell coming from somewhere gave it out. I know there's someone out there, like someone is purposely trying to scare me. Whatever this is, this didn't look like a typical break-in. They wouldn't have left a trace nor a smell. But the strong coolness of mint left my brain foggy. I stood up to barricade the door with a chair when suddenly a voice came out from the other side. It sounds like my mother. She was asking me to come out, like she knew that I'm in my room the whole time. I didn't respond. I'm already scared shitless to utter a word. But for some goddamn reason I crouched back to see what's outside, and I shouldn't have done it. Because from out of the normal, the sofas, the turned-off TV, and the lamp table besides the television, the only thing that stands out like sore thumb is a foot standing irregularly stiff, a few feet from my door. Wearing the same shoe my mother was convinced she misplaced. She didn't knock nor tried to break in. She just stand there waiting for me to say anything or do anything. And when it already feels like an hour. She took a step forward, but with the tip of her sandals, her heels up, walking on tippy toes towards my room. She called again. Her voice was soft and not threatening. This time I used my body along with the chair to barricade what's out there. She keeps calling my name as if she knows me. Using the voice, I thought it was my mother. But hers was a bit deeper, almost an imitation. She didn't bang the door nor force herself in. She just stands there, waiting for me to do something. I remember how sweaty I was despite the cold, and I almost forgot how that night ended. All I knew is my brother found me sleeping next to the chair I used to barricade with. He said my room was open before he got back, and I was lying limp with my head on the chair, sleeping soundly. If that was a dream, that was the most fuck-up shit I've ever experienced, and I won't take it any other than that. Still, I can't help but ask myself, who opened the door before my brother or even let himself in? I actually just came across this subreddit, so I'm not 100% positive if everything here is fiction or non-fiction. So I will preface this post by telling you that this did happen to me, and this is a true story. It was a dark, muggy night in June 2020 when I found myself traveling to the depths of the Badlands of Kensington, leaving a recovery house and battling a vicious addiction to heroin and fentanyl. As I stepped off the L train at Kensington Allegheny, the familiar pangs of dope sickness began to grip my body. Desperate for relief, I quickly scored from a dealer on the block, but little did I know that the events about to unfold would forever alter the course of my life. As I crossed the street, I passed two young black men engaged in what seemed like a friendly conversation. Suddenly, the air erupted with flashes and a deafening pop, followed by a series of muffled shots. I whipped around to see one of the men clutching a 9mm, his hand pumping round after round at the other guy, who was now sprinting in the opposite direction. Instinctively, I dove onto the sidewalk, my face pressed against the concrete as I watched the scene unfold. At first, I thought it was just fireworks, a common occurrence during the summer months. But as the shooter emptied his clip and disappeared into the darkness, the reality of the situation hit me like a freight train. The intended target kept running, seemingly unscathed, until someone yelled out, "You're hit! You're hit!" As if on cue, the man's body went limp mid-stride and he collapsed to the ground, sliding nearly 10 feet before coming to a stop. As I lay there, our eyes met, and in that moment I witnessed something I could never have prepared for. He let out a gurgling breath, and his body seemed to deflate, melting into the ground. It was a sight that no amount of violent movies could have ever adequately portrayed, the raw, unsettling reality of death. Within minutes, a pool of blood began to surround him, and a Philadelphia police squad car came screeching around the corner. The officers quickly loaded the man into the back of the vehicle and sped off to the hospital, leaving me sitting there frozen in shock. For the next 3 hours, I remained in that spot, staring at the place where he had fallen. Police officers asked me what had happened, but I remained silent, knowing that in the heart of the Kensington Badlands, speaking up could mean sealing my own fate. I sat there using, but couldn't get the energy to leave, and just sat there in silence for hours until the investigation ended and the police dispersed. That night, something inside me changed. A part of me died, but another part was born. Looking back, the optimist in me believes it was all part of my journey to sobriety, while the pessimist whispers that I have unfinished business with hell. I could write a book on the hellish things I witnessed in my year on the streets of Kensington's worst areas. I had seen death a dozen times since then during that year, including my own, but this one was different. Today I stand 27 months sober, but the memories of that night in Kensington will forever be etched into my soul. A stark reminder of the darkness I've overcome and the strength I've found within myself to forge a new path. When my grandparents passed, I inherited their house. It wasn't much to speak of, a small 2-story home nestled at the edge of a quiet, forested town, but it had a charm to it, the kind you only find in places that have been lived in for decades. My mother wanted nothing to do with it. She'd left home at 18 and rarely looked back, saying there was too much history in those walls. I didn't understand what she meant at the time. I do now. I moved in last spring, determined to make it my own. The house needed work, peeling paint, a leaky roof, creaking floorboards, but it was mine and I was proud of it. For the first few weeks, I kept busy cleaning and fixing what I could. I painted the walls, replaced the locks, and even sorted through the boxes in the attic, unearthing relics of a life I barely knew. It wasn't until I'd settled in that I noticed the door. At first, I didn't think much of it. Houses settle, walls shift, and memory is a fickle thing. Maybe I just hadn't noticed it before, tucked at the end of the hallway, its dull surface blending into the pale plaster. It wasn't worth a second thought, but that was before I realized it wasn't supposed to be there. The hallway had always been an unremarkable stretch of space, 3 doors evenly spaced along the wall. My room, the bathroom, the closet. It had been that way for as long as I could remember. But now there was a fourth, and no matter how much I tried to ignore it, the thought of it stuck in my mind like a splinter. The next time I passed it, I slowed, eyes drawn to the crack under its frame. There was no light bleeding through, no air stirring, but the space beneath the door seemed wrong. Too narrow, too dark. I should have stopped. I should have stared it down, but something about it repelled me, like looking too long might invite it closer. I walked on, refusing to glance back, but even as I left it behind, I felt its presence settle in my chest, heavy and expectant. By the 3rd day, the door felt larger. It hadn't grown, I checked, glancing quickly as I passed. A stolen glance, like a child avoiding something shameful. It was still the same size, the same dull wood, the same smudged brass knob. But it felt larger, like it took up more space than it physically occupied, like the hallway itself was bending around it. At night, I lay in bed and swore I could feel it there, a weight pressing against the edges of my mind. My dreams grew strange images of empty corridors, endless rows of doors that opened to nothing but more doors. I told myself it was just my imagination. Doors don't move, they don't watch. But when I woke up and stepped into the hallway, I found myself staring at it again, as if I'd been pulled there in my sleep. The door didn't belong. That was the thought that consumed me as I stood there one evening, frozen halfway down the hall. It was just a door wood, hinges, a knob. Nothing about it should have felt threatening, but it didn't feel like something a person had made. It was too still, too deliberate, as though its very existence in my home was an act of will. Its surface looked too smooth in places, almost wet, while other parts seemed aged, warped, like it had been sitting there for decades. The closer I got, the more the texture seemed to shift, like the grain of the wood couldn't decide what it wanted to be. I backed away. The days stretched into a week, and the hallway became a gauntlet. Every time I passed, I told myself I wouldn't look at it, and every time I failed. My glances grew longer, lingering, as though the door were daring me to come closer. Its presence had a gravity to it, subtle but unyielding, pulling my thoughts back even when I was nowhere near the hallway. I stopped using the kitchen at night. I stopped leaving my room unless I had to. But it didn't help. The door was there in my mind, no matter where I went, a constant weight pressing against the edges of my thoughts. What was behind it? One night I couldn't resist any longer. I found myself standing in the hallway, barefoot, the dim glow of the nightlight casting long shadows. The door was waiting, as it always was, but tonight it felt eager. I reached for the knob before I could stop myself. The brass was cool under my fingers, colder than it should have been, like it had been pulled from deep underground. I hesitated. My breath caught in my throat as the silence pressed against me, thick and unyielding. Somewhere in the house, a clock ticked, and the sound seemed deafening, the only thing tethering me to reality. I turned the knob. The door swung inward with an almost imperceptible sigh, as though it had been holding its breath. At first, there was nothing, just a room. The air was stale, the kind of stillness that clings to spaces long forgotten. The walls were bare, the paint a dull off-white that might once have been bright but had long since faded. A single light bulb hung from the ceiling, swaying slightly, though there was no breeze to move it. It wasn't the room itself that unsettled me. It was how ordinary it was. This was a place that didn't belong, not in my house, not anywhere I could name, but it looked so normal it hurt. The angles of the walls seemed slightly off, the kind of imperfection you couldn't put your finger on but could feel in your gut. And in the center of the room, there was a chair. Plain wood, no cushions, no carvings, just a chair sitting in the middle of the room facing the doorway, facing me. The light bulb flickered once, briefly, and for that instant the room was swallowed by darkness. But it wasn't the kind of darkness that obscures it, was the kind that clarifies, stripping away the pretense of what things ought to be. In the absence of light, the walls rippled like living skin, the corners stretched outward into unseen distances, and the chair blurred, its edges softening into impossible curves, as though it wasn't in the room, but the room existed within it. Shadows crawled across the floor, curling around the chair's legs, shifting with whispered shapes, arms, spines, things almost human but too alien to comfort. When the bulb flared back to life, the room snapped into its banal state. Bare walls, a plain chair, stagnant air. But the shadows lingered in my mind, burned into the edges of my vision, as if they had never truly left. The hallway is silent now, the door gone as though it had never been there, but I know better. It's waiting, somewhere, in the unseen corners of my home. And I fear that the next time I glance in its direction, I won't have the strength to turn away. I actually got to work early today, and only one other coworker was there at the time. We were prepping for an evening event, but it was still midday and sunny. I was the lead for the upstairs concession stand, and she the downstairs, with more coworkers scheduled to arrive a half hour after us. My coworker asked me to grab a few cases of water and pop from the walk-in fridge. Let me preface. This building is an old stadium for a vehicle track at our state fairground. From the concession stand, you go into the fair's storage room. This is a large room full of carnival ride parts and mirrors, and a couple of decommissioned rides from fairs past, as well as other miscellaneous stored things. Then there's a weird little hall with unknown-to-me rooms. You take a left, and the very old walk-in fridge is there, with some dilapidated stairs beside it, but no one uses them anymore for safety reasons. It's always given me the creeps because it's very dimly lit and you may catch your own reflection. or a life-size clowns that belongs on a carnival ride. But it's part of my job to stock the stand, and no one newer than me was here to pass the job on to. So I grabbed my cart and went in. I got the usual hairs standing on the back of my neck and the increased heart rate, but I managed to get all the cases we needed to set up and started to head back out. Except when I opened the old heavy door of the fridge, I noticed the dim lighting had totally gone out behind me. Super creepy, but not too crazy for a building built in 1894. Obviously, updates have been made since, but I wouldn't guess too many. I turned on my phone's flashlight and began to push my cart through the hallway and back into the large storage room. I'm not kidding you. My wheel jammed and my phone's flashlight turned off simultaneously. I fumbled with my phone for a second and opted to just try and manhandle the cart full of liquid weight through the maze of carnival junk, when one of the alarms on an old game started to blare, red light flashing, lighting up the room with each turn of the siren. Everything in me became an adrenaline-fueled flight out of there. I switched to the other side of the cart and pulled, dragging the stuck wheel along until I made it to the door out. I slammed my weight into it and in the same motion dragged the whole cart through. I made it back to the light of day. I'm sure everything about me read, terrified, and my coworker asked me if I was all right. I asked her if she had heard the alarm go off. She told me that she did not. She looked so confused that I have to believe her. I really don't know how she could have missed it. Even if she didn't see the red lights, it was so loud. Everyone I work with has a ghost story from this building. I guess I've earned mine. I'm different. Off, some say weird. Amongst the angels of heaven, I feel like I'm the only one who doesn't belong. Not broken exactly, but not quite like the others. Where their voices are steady, mine stutters. Where their actions are certain, I hesitate. And where they accept everything without question, I can't help but to ask myself, why? I don't know what makes me this way. Maybe I was made wrong, or maybe I just see things I'm not supposed to see. All I know is that I feel out of place in a world where everything else seems flawless. Heaven is beautiful. Perfect, actually. Well, that's what everyone says. Light moves like music here, spilling through endless crystalline spires. Every angel has a purpose, every action a meaning. Together we move like parts of a perfect clock. Every tick guided by the Creator's will, every talk pre-planned. For the longest time I tried to believe that. I told myself it was enough. That the problem was in me, the glitch. The one thread that didn't weave into any tapestry I'd seen. But then I started to notice things. Little things so small I thought I imagined them. Sometimes the light didn't shine the way it should, like it missed its mark or a shadow overcame it for no reason. Sometimes the music faltered just for a heartbeat, like a single note had been dropped. No one else seemed to see or hear it, but I couldn't deny it, and the more I looked, the more I noticed. At first I ignored it. I told myself it didn't matter. But the cracks, the glitches, they kept appearing. They weren't constant, just quick enough to slip past without leaving a trace. They left me doubting myself. I thought it was just another one of my own flaws. Whatever it was warping what I saw. But it wasn't just me. Whenever I noticed the cracks, I'd felt him watching me, the Creator. His gaze would fall on me in those moments, not harsh, not angry, but knowing, like he saw what I saw and wanted me to see more. It wasn't just acknowledgement, it was something heavier, something I didn't understand but couldn't shake. It felt inevitable, like he was waiting for me to figure it out. Waiting for what? I kept quiet, trying to bury what I knew deep inside me. After all, no one else seemed to notice or care. The other angels carried out their tasks with the same grace and certainty as always, not a hiccup or hesitation. They didn't falter, why would they? They were perfect, I envied them. I envied their peace, their purpose, their certainty. Still, I couldn't let it go. The cracks, or what I call glitches, just didn't make sense. How could there be flaws in a world built by perfection itself? The Creator's will was supposed to be absolute, unshakable. That's what we were taught. That's what we believed. That's what I wanted to believe. Still, the cracks whispered something else to me. They whispered that maybe perfection wasn't what it seemed. I don't know how long I stayed silent. Time in heaven doesn't pass the way it does elsewhere, or in this new world, but it felt like eternity, an eternity spent pretending I didn't see what I saw, pretending I was like everyone else, pretending I wasn't different. But pretending doesn't change anything. It doesn't make the truth disappear. The cracks were always there, waiting. And eventually, so was I, until one day I slipped up. Until one day. I had never visited the small town of Johannes before, somewhere on the border of Germany and Switzerland, despite my fairly extensive travels for work around Europe. These continental small towns, they are so charming and picturesque, the literal scenes of the sound of music and shite like that. However, they do end up being a bit samey, and I wasn't expecting my overnight stay at Johannes to be much different. It was an unplanned stop. I had found myself somewhat tired and drowsy after an exceptionally good meal, and decided to check in a local inn and get some much-needed sleep. The pretty inn with blooming spring flowers at the windowsills and such like certainly didn't belie the horror of the next day. It was only the obvious confusion of the otherwise polite young clerk upon laying eyes on me that gave me the inkling that I had made a terrible choice to break my journey in Johannes. I couldn't help noticing the large bright posters hanging in the lobby, depicting small crowds of people clearly of non-European descent, such as Arabs, Middle Eastern, Far East and Southeastern Asians. They all bore the words Lottery Dag 2023, some kind of artsy United Colors of Benetton ad, I naively assumed. The clerk, himself clearly of Middle Eastern origin, greeted me with a startled look which he could not hide. He asked for my name and then exclaimed, "Mr. Abbas, you are Mr. Abbas and you're staying here?" I was irritated. Yes, indeed, I am staying for one night. This seemed as good a place as any for a stop. I was too tired to drive on. "Can I see your ID, please? Do you have European ID, sir?" To my ears, he sounded very suspicious. I am, of course, used to a certain amount of low-level, poorly concealed racism traveling in Europe, but I couldn't help feeling a bit disappointed that this clerk, whose parents, if not himself, would probably have shared a similar heritage to mine, would act like this. I offered my passport. "No, but I have the correct visas," I responded sharply. The clerk said nothing more and checked me in. My mood soured, I went to my room and soon fell asleep. The next morning, 2 officers approached me at the breakfast table where I was enjoying some amazing pastries, already checked out and my suitcase at my side. "We entered you in the lottery, sir," they said in heavy accents. "We ran background checks on you. You are waiting for your Canadian citizenship and thus eligible to enter. Canada entered an official agreement with our government just last week. You can look up the articles." I stared at them, completely confused. "What are you talking about?" They returned my stare with bland official courtesy. "The lottery, sir. You will be entering the passport lottery held periodically at Johannes to celebrate the citizenship of our hard-working foreign worker population. You were found to meet the official requirements for entry. We entered your name. You will present yourself at the town square in precisely 43 minutes when the name will be drawn." The other continued. "And sir, please do not even think of leaving Johannes or calling anyone outside the town. It will be much better for you to complete the lottery. The odds are, you will be on your way within the hour." They left. With a shaking hand, I pulled out my phone and began Googling. Within seconds, I realized I do not have access to the worldwide internet, but only some weird local Johannes intranet. I hastily clicked on the bizarre English translation. The lottery was the almost last step on the long, convoluted journey for foreigners in Johannes, applying to become citizens. After years of filling and sending in forms, paying fees, waiting, interviews, more forms, changes to family composition, more waiting, foreigners who were eligible for citizenship and the cherished passport of a European country would have to enter the lottery. The foreign community would choose one person, who would be sent by ambulance to the local hospital, where they would be administered a painless, lethal dose by professionals. The final step, necessary to prove their loyalty and dedication to their new country. I clicked through the convoluted intranet text, sun streaming on the beautiful breakfast setting. A cuckoo jumped out of an ornate old cuckoo clock and declared time. The young clerk from last night came up to me as I was reading. "Mr. Abbas, it is time to go. The community, it's better to go. They don't like it if there are delays." I looked up at him, terror gripping me. "I don't understand. How is this happening? How is this legal?" The clerk shrugged. "It is legal. The municipal councils voted it in a few years ago, and the elders of the community support it. There were so many hate crimes, so much violence against foreigners. It is better now. I heard North America will be adopting similar laws soon. Of course, it is very silent now, but if you looked, you would have found the information. And of course, the dependents of the sacrifice will be supported. Very humane. But come, let's go. We cannot keep them waiting. Propelled by fear, I got up and followed him outside. The sun poured through the clear alpine air into my eyes. In the glare, I could see knots of people, in twos and threes, walking down the scenic mountain streets all towards the city square. The clerk and I joined the flow. Walking by us was a small group of women, dressed in ornate, decorative ethnic clothing I would associate with India. The sunlight struck off the brilliant spangles in their clothes. I then noticed many people were dressed ethnically, while others wore plain Western-style clothing. Several women wore the hijab. There was little subdued chatter. I heard a woman in a sparkling robe say in a dialect I recalled from my childhood, "I prayed and prayed all night it would be me. I can't bear my children," before the other women said, "Shh, Tasneem, do not talk of it. Do not go welcoming sorrow." As we drew closer to the town square, the crowds grew larger and quieter. There was a moment of pure silence. Then everything began happening very fast. A middle-aged man who looked to be some authority figure went up on a platform before a small, splashy fountain which held the statue of naked white Venus and some other Greek deity. I just noticed the device set up on the platform. The man operated the device. My heart was beating so fast as it spit out a paper that I thought it would burst out of my chest. The man held up the paper and he read out a name. Tasneem. I didn't catch the last part of the name and the rippling sigh which broke through the crowd. I saw the women fall away from the one whom I had earlier heard talking about praying. In the same movement, paramedics moved up to her and started guiding her towards a waiting ambulance at the edge of the town square. The silence continued, although small murmurs could be heard. Tasneem did not struggle. Her demeanor seemed one of submission. The knots of people broke away from the crowd. A certain festive mood was undeniable. My young companion was no longer at my side, and I caught sight of him running over to young folk closer to his age, releasing a whoop of joy and relief. I looked around. The two officers approached me and smiled grimly. "Very well, Mr. Abbas, the lottery is over. Congratulations on your upcoming citizenship. You may depart now without any further delays." I nodded. It was clear they expected me to leave right then. I could not disobey. I quickly walked to my car and got in. Within 20 minutes, I was well on my way to my destination, Shirl Johannes behind me. May I never set foot in that terrible town again. To say that the Holloway family was plagued by misfortune would be a gross understatement. The Holloways, a beautiful and happy young couple, Genevieve and Victor, dated in secret due to their families vehemently disapproving of their relationship. With each hurdle they faced, their bond grew stronger, as if the odds against them fueled their romance. Perhaps they were right. It would explain Victor's unwavering determination to remain by Genevieve's side during their darkest moments. On the night of their 5th year of dating, Victor knelt before Genevieve, and in a swirl of emotions proposed to Genevieve. Her eyes sparkled with joy as she gladly accepted, sealing their love with an unbreakable bond. They chose to hold their wedding on the rugged coastline of Tarlag, overlooking the stormy gray sea that gave way to an even stormier sky. Rain poured down, a beautiful sign of luck for those who believe in such things as fate. Yet the old gods don't care for such superstition. Following their blissful honeymoon, the couple settled in Orth, a small town nestled at the heart of Tarlag. Their new residence, nearly a mansion, whispered the promise of a tranquil life. The week after moving in, laughter filled the halls, evening dances warmed their souls, and the love-making was tender and passionate. In those 7 fleeting days, they experienced the height of peace that would elude them for the rest of their tragically short lives. One afternoon, Victor decided to surprise his wife with lunch and departed from work early. As he excitedly entered the home, he immediately was met with the putrid stench of death and decay. He rushed through the house, panic rising in him. And there in the kitchen he found Genevieve, her head slumped in her hands. Fear gripped his heart, but relief washed over him as he realized she was still breathing, though her tears flowed unceasingly. "My beloved, why are you crying?" he asked with concern in his voice. His eyes searched her tear-stained face for answers. Genevieve gulped and wiped her swollen eyes, forcing a smile onto trembling lips. "Oh, it's nothing, really," she began and let out a dry chuckle. "It's just these damned plants we keep buying. They wither and die almost as soon as we plant them. It's just pushed me over the edge today, I'm afraid. Victor wrapped his arms around Genevieve as she continued her ragged breaths, still trying to compose herself. As Victor lifted his eyes to meet hers, he caught sight of the lifeless plants. His brows furrowed in confusion, and he pushed himself up and away from his wife. Slowly, he walked nearer to the planters. The once vibrant greens were now a deep, ominous black, as if painted. The putrid odor emanating from the soil resembled the stench of a decaying corpse. When he turned his gaze, the crumpled leaves reflected the sunlight, casting ethereal shadows of light blue veins across their withered surface. Perhaps the soil has been tainted, Victor suggested, his eyes still inspecting the vegetation. He leaned in closer and ran a hand along the cracked surface of the wilting leaves. I can make a stop at the store after work today and bring back some replacements. Genevieve's expression faded into one of relief and gratitude as she smiled at her husband, her gaze lingering on the fading plants. The couple enjoyed their meal and spoke no more of the plants during their lunch. In fact, the thought of the plants wouldn't even cross their mind until 2 weeks later. That fateful night, as Victor drove along the cobbled streets of his neighborhood, he returned home to find the ominous presence of authorities awaiting his arrival. His hands trembled as he stepped out of the car, a knot of unease coiling in his stomach. "Good evening, officers. What seems to be the problem?" Two imposing figures, tall yet slender, turned their attention to him. Genevieve stood behind them, tears streaking her face. The taller officer stepped forward and, with a serious expression, pointed to a spot on the ground in the front yard. Victor followed the officer's gesture, his eyes tracing the outline on the ground. Suddenly, the realization dawned upon him, and his stomach churned with horror. He nearly vomited at the sight. His blood ran cold and pulse hastened. A mere yard away lay the lifeless body of a young boy with bright blue veins, who was contorted and broken, as if twisted by the metal hands of a god. The reasoning became painfully apparent. Dark black vines coiling around the child's lifeless form. After hours of intense interrogation, the bewildered couple was released to return home. In a state of pure shock, they drove home in silence and spoke no words the rest of the night. They changed mechanically, slipped under the covers, and fell into an uneasy sleep. When morning came, the corpse had vanished, much like their fragmented memory of the event. Weeks passed, marked by sporadic incidents that would slip from their memory moments later. Genevieve grew increasingly cold and agitated, but had no explanation for her actions. As the couple settled into their house, they attempted to bridge the divide between their families, extending an invitation to both sets of parents for a housewarming dinner. A light rain set the tone for the evening as both families arrived at the door to the Holloway house. Gwendolyn and Nathaniel, Genevieve's parents, immediately started to bicker with Percival and Arabella, Victor's parents. However, as soon as the door had been opened by their children, the nonsensical fighting ceased. As the evening progressed, the families were civil but made no effort to connect. For Genevieve and Victor, this was a good start and a small win. When dinner time approached, the 6 members all sat around the table and ate in near silence. The food was delicious, and the couple felt happy. Suddenly, a horrible guttural sound emitted from Arabella as she began to choke. Her rash-stricken hands grasped around her throat as she tried to gasp for air. Victor, Percival, and Genevieve all rushed to her side, attempting to help. The sound of her desperate gasps filled the room, mixing with the clattering of cutlery and the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Genevieve's parents, unmoved, watched the unfolding chaos with unblinking eyes. Victor's mother collapsed face down onto the table before grabbing her knife and stabbing into her throat, causing a horrible gurgling sound to fill the air. The smooth metal pierced through flesh and sinew, releasing a sickening wet sound that reverberated through the room. The sharp tang of iron filled the air as blood spurted from the wound, staining the pristinely white tablecloth. The metallic scent mingled with the half-eaten food, creating a disturbing juxtaposition of smells. A floorboard quietly creaked as the 3 stood over her body in shock, their breath shallow, as blood continued to pour out and pool onto the ground. Her lifeless eyes, wide and glassy, never broke contact with Genevieve's parents as they watched on with unchanged expressions. Arabella expelled one last bubbling breath before a haunting silence filled the room. In the weeks that followed, a procession of officers made their way to the Holloway's residence, seeking answers in the wake of Victor's mother's death. An examiner meticulously examined the body, their analysis concluding that no foul play was involved. With a heavy heart, The cause of death was declared as suicide. The verdict infuriated Victor, fueling his fury and directing his blame towards Genevieve's parents. As time passed, the memory of his mother's death began to fade from the forefront of Victor's mind. Yet an elusive sensation gnawed at the edges of his mind, giving him the feeling that he had forgotten something, but for the life of him he couldn't remember. It drove him nearly to madness, and he had become a shell of her former self, spending his days sulking about. In the aftermath of previous events, his business faltered. Friends turned their backs on him, and then, in a cruel twist of fate, his father died. Just when despair threatened to consume him entirely, a glimmer of hope arose. A suggestion from Genevieve to start a family, to start anew. The prospect of a fresh chapter in life infused Victor with a newfound sense of purpose in life. He threw himself into the task of resurrecting his shattered existence. No longer would he spend his days in a pit of despair and melancholy. Instead, they were filled with the relentless effort to resurrect his broken business and friendships. With the arrival of each evening, Victor would return home with anticipation. Their joy knew no bounds when Genevieve's pregnancy was confirmed, and the two celebrated with elation the moment they discovered that they would soon be parents. However, fate was so unkind to the Holloways. 4 months later, Victor came home to find a familiar sight. Genevieve sat in the kitchen with her head buried in her hands, her sobs quietly echoing in the room. Rushing to her side, Victor desperately wanted to comfort her, but she pushed him aside and ran upstairs to the bedroom. The resounding slam of the door shook the whole house, and Victor stood motionless and confused in the kitchen. That same evening, in a moment of heart-wrenching revelation, Victor discovered the source of his wife's distress. In the toilet, he found the remains of the tiny, fragile fetus of the child that would have been his son. Overwhelmed with grief, he fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face. His anguished cries and curses filled the small bathroom. He felt like a spectator, watching his own life falling apart as he stood helpless, powerless. I wish I could say that this was the last time the family would experience such a tragic loss, but that would be untruthful. In total, Genevieve experienced 4 more miscarriages. Each one caused Genevieve to spiral more and more into an agitated and hateful state, oftentimes abusing substances to dull the pain until she would become paranoid and begin seeing visions of her dead children. Through the pain and suffering, the couple still tried for a child, and finally the couple eventually had a successful birth. Happiness filled the couple the first moment they laid eyes on their newborn son, Silas. They poured their souls into nurturing Silas, savoring a brief pause from the trials that had plagued them. It was during this fleeting moment that the notion of another child took hold, an embodiment of their love and a lifelong companion for Silas. Experiencing much less difficulties this time, Genevieve became pregnant, and within 9 months, Silas did indeed have a lifelong friend, his little sister Evangeline. Unfortunately, not even 2 weeks after giving birth, Evangeline's mother became uncharacteristically fearful of Evangeline and Silas. A short time after that, she became engulfed in delusions and claimed to be seeing strange, ghastly figures floating above the children like ethereal sectors. Visions of her dead children, their skin always a milky white with bright blue veins snaking across their body, taunting her. Their disembodied voices telling her that she was the cause of their deaths. The terrors grew more frequent, and it didn't take too long for her to begin resenting Silas and Evangeline. The tendrils of madness gripped her rightly, compelling her to attempt to harm her own children. One evening at dinner, Victor gathered his courage to speak on the matter, but his small thread of hope snapped. His words were met with a storm of violence as she lashed out, and in frenzy she severed his left thumb. Stunned at her own actions, Genevieve froze in place, nearly comatose, as Victor's thumb bled out and stained the wooden floor. With haste, Victor received medical attention that same evening from a neighbor, a doctor who skillfully stitched his thumb shut. Returning home, dread engulfed him as he discovered Genevieve attempting to drown Evangeline in the bath, her tiny body thrashing against the relentless grasp of her mother. Powered by adrenaline and fear, Victor threw his wife to the ground and pulled Evangeline from the water. The child began to cry as if she knew that she was moments from her life being cut short. Following the incident, Victor made a heart-wrenching decision. He locked his wife within the confines of their bedroom and made it explicitly clear to his children that the door would only be opened when he took Genevieve meals, or when doctors came to check on her. And there were many, many doctors that came for the next 2 years who tried to cure the delusional mother with various cures. Though Victor was determined to see his wife healed and stay with her through the times of darkness, his hope began to fade as each doctor came to the same conclusion. There was no remedy. Time wore on, and 2 years later, Genevieve was still imprisoned in the bedroom. Evangeline and Silas became more distant from their mother as every day passed. When the doctors told Victor that there was truly nothing more they could do to help his wife, he fell into a horrible and deep depression, leaving his 2 children to fend for themselves. Though it seemed that Victor would perpetually be in this state, fate had other ideas. One night, just as Evangeline and Silas were getting into bed, a pained wailing of torment came from within Genevieve's locked bedroom. She screamed and hollered while pounding her fists onto the door. "She's going to kill me too," she screamed. "Help, please, somebody help," she continued to cry. The cacophony filled the entire house, and Silas rushed to cover his little sister's ears. The horrifying, violent screams and pounding continued all through the night, as if an animal was being tortured. After seemingly endless hours of being a victim of the noise, it ceased. The moment the sun rose, the noises stopped, as if Genevieve ceased to exist. Evangeline and Silas, after a night of nearly no sleep, hid under their blankets as Victor went to check his wife's status. As he slowly approached the locked door, he felt his heart pounding out of his chest. The closer he got to the locked bedroom, the more he fought back tears and horror. With a shaking hand, Victor pulled out the bedroom key and slowly turned the lock. A slight click emitted, and with ragged breath, he opened the door. The moment the door opened, he was hit with the stench of excrement, bile, and coppery blood. Though his nose had prepared him for what was in the room, he was still rocked to his core by what he saw. Genevieve, his once young and beautiful wife, sat kneeling in a mushy pile of feces, vomit, and blood. Her face was streaked with jagged cuts, and small beads of crimson blood dotted her face. Her breath was shallow and shaky. She was still alive. On the floor, written in blood, was a strange word, Kiathar. Victor, doing everything in his power not to vomit, held a hand to his mouth and quickly shut the door. In one swift motion, he locked the door, ran to the bathroom, and vomited. After he had composed himself, he made his way to his children's room. He lightly knocked on the door before entering. The sight of his 2 children hiding under their covers broke his heart. He sat on the edge of Silas's bed and cleared his throat, claiming the attention of both children. "Your mother is very sick," he began with a quavering voice. "I'm not sure what to do at this point. There may not be anything we can do." He looked at his children, both with tears forming in their eyes. Words failed him, and with a heavy heart he departed the bedroom, descending into his study. There, beneath the desk, he unlocked a safe to retrieve a revolver. He loaded the weapon with shaky hands, then positioned himself in the hallway between his insane wife and terrified children. A broken-hearted sentinel. For an agonizing month, the night was tormented by the horrible and vile screams that ceased only in the morning light. Victor had become desperate, and thoughts of murder-suicide haunted him relentlessly. Finally, driven to the brink, Victor went to extremes. He sought out the aid of the secretive figure, Dr. Lucius Ravenscroft. Tales spoke of the doctor possessing knowledge of forbidden arts and remedies, capable of delving into the realms beyond what science could explain. One dreary evening, Victor, Silas, and Evangeline had gathered in the downstairs study as Dr. Ravenscroft arrived at the Holloway residence under the veil of night. The doctor rapped on the door, which was nearly drowned out by the howls of Genevieve. Victor quickly opened the door, beckoning Dr. Ravenscroft inside. Victor peered outside around his home, ensuring nosy eyes had paid no attention to the mysterious man. Silas held the hand of Evangeline as they both stared in awe at Dr. Ravenscroft, who towered above them and dressed in strange garb. He swiftly shed his black coat and hat, draping them over a chair. Grasped tightly in his left hand was a metal case, very reminiscent of a briefcase, that glinted in the dim light as it swayed with the doctor's every move. Victor approached Dr. Ravenscroft and slipped him an envelope of cash and the bedroom key. Without a word, Dr. Ravenscroft gave Victor a stiff nod of the head and began to walk upstairs, unknowingly marching towards his own peril. With unwavering resolve and steady hand, he unlocked the door to Genevieve's door. Nausea washed over him as the sickening stench of decaying flesh, blood, and excrement assaulted Dr. Ravenscroft's senses. Peering into the darkness, he barely discerned the twisted form of Genevieve Holloway. Her once graceful figure had turned saggy and corpulent, every blue pulsating vein oozing with blackened blood. Sunken into her head, her emerald eyes had transformed into yellow marbles. With razor-sharp teeth dripping with her own life's essence, Genevieve grinned at Dr. Ravenscroft. The room reverberated with a choking, guttural sound, her perverse laughter. Dr. Ravenscroft removed a smooth jade amulet from his pocket and clasped it around his neck. He lightly traced a rune on the front of the amulet, causing a faint green glow to surround his body like misty armor. In a swift motion, the doctor unlocked the case, retrieving a long stick of chalk and a handful of candles. He gripped the chalk tightly as he meticulously drew a massive triangle enclosed within a square. With precise movements, he positioned a lit candle on each corner of the geometric symbols, casting eerie shadows that danced upon the walls. From the case, he retrieved a strange device, a convergence of two metallic bars intersecting in the shape of a T, adorned with jagged shards of glass. With closed eyes, Dr. Ravenscroft began to chant in a bizarre language under his breath. The flames of the candles swayed and flickered as invisible currents began to circle around the room. Genevieve's yellow eyes watched intently as the flames danced. Her drooping mouth frowned and she grunted. "What sort of nonsensical charade is this, Doctor?" Genevieve asked, her wet, raspy breaths carrying a mix of confusion and malice. Unwavering in his incantation, Dr. Ravenscroft raised the T-shaped device to the sky. The light of the flames began to reflect and refract off of the glass, shining a brilliant orange-yellow glow onto Genevieve's monstrous form. As Dr. Ravenscroft opened his eyes, strange images flashed on the glass shards that faced him. In the reflection, Dr. Ravenscroft beheld the transformation of Genevieve's fleshy form into a tall, dark figure, with black flowing hair and yellow eyes. She towered over the coastline of Tarleg, as if ready to devour the land. A wicked smile parted her lips, revealing dagger-like teeth that tore into the water, releasing a billowing of green mist from the cracks. "Kiathar," a deep, bone-chilling voice reverberated in the doctor's head. At that moment, realization struck him. He looked into the creature's eyes and drew a shallow breath before taking on a gravely serious expression. "Why torment this woman?" he asked, while shifting the weight between legs, careful never to move outside of the chalk symbols or loosen his grasp on the device which showed him the truth. The monster's eyes fluttered back in her head before glowing a brilliant amber. The smell of death grew stronger, and shadows seemed to creep towards Dr. Ravenscroft. "Easy to corrupt," the creature slowly began. Each word sounded as if it was being choked out from the depths of her soul. "Pain is easy to manipulate. I need a body. Why not her? I need food. Why not the family, the fetuses?" she taunted. Without hesitation, Dr. Ravenscroft cast the device to the ground, shattering the glass. Stomping out the candles, he disrupted the ethereal connection, unleashing a tempest within the confined space. Desperate, he fell to his knees and dug his fingernails into the floor, gripping for dear life to resist the chaotic force that sought to hurl him towards Genevieve's monstrous form. Upon hearing the noises from the upper floor, Victor mustered all his strength and raced up the stairs, flinging the door open with determination. However, the winds that filled the room immediately seized him, hurling him backwards into the hallway. "What on earth is going on, Ravenscroft?" Victor bellowed, barely audible amidst the howling of wind. Dr. Ravenscroft attempted to gesture for Victor to leave, but the moment he released his grip from the floor, he too was violently thrown against the wall. Silas, also drawn by the commotion, arrived at the scene, eyes wide with alarm. He stood near his father, and both men looked at Dr. Ravenscroft with bewildered expressions. "You must stop her!" the doctor gasped, his voice strained against the screaming of currents. "Kiathar, goddess of death, she possesses your wife!" He desperately tried to shout. Victor and Silas stood paralyzed, their minds grappling with the horrifying reality that unfolded. Their gazes locked onto Dr. Ravenscroft as he drew a revolver and took aim towards Genevieve's monstrous form. A thunderous blast echoed through the room, immediately followed by a sickening thud as the bullet flew through the air and buried itself into the wood, merely inches away from the doctor's skull. In an instant, the grotesque entity propelled herself across the room, her jaw unhinging unnaturally wide. She aimed for Dr. Ravenscroft, but as her row of jagged teeth clenched down around his arm, she was propelled backwards. In a flash of bright green light, Dr. Ravenscroft shot backwards through the wooden walls and onto the wet grass outside before falling unconscious. The amulet that once hung from his neck laid in pieces next to him. Genevieve's monstrous form growled and chewed the small chunk of flesh she had ripped from the doctor. As the blood flowed down her fleshy body, she began to metamorphosize. The creature grew larger, sprouting extra limbs. With newfound mobility and strength, the creature hurled herself towards the door, knocking over Victor and Silas. Before he could even realize what was happening, Silas was being ripped in half by the beast that once was his mother. The circular mouth of the monster began to chew at Silas's exposed innards, and with every bite she grew larger and more monstrous. The sound of ripping, squelching flesh completely overwhelmed the screams that came from the child. Her maw opened, dropping the corpse of her dead son onto the ground with a wet, hollow thunk. Then, with a shudder that caused more veins to bulge, she turned her attention to Victor. Using her numerous bloated arms, she slowly crawled towards Victor as he quickly shuffled backwards, inching closer to the staircase. The creature let out a gurgling, choking sound, and she crawled on top of the horrified man. Her nostrils flared and picked up the scent of blood and urine. Victor had soiled himself in fear. It would be his final act. Victor opened his mouth to plead to the creature that used to be his wife, but was immediately cut off as the creature's maw clamped down upon his neck, severing his head from his body. A sickening slurping sound followed as the rest of Victor's body was sucked into the monster's body, causing her to grow larger and sprout pudgy feet. She took waddling steps towards the staircase before falling down the flight of stairs. With a piercing scream that shook the house, the abominable Genevieve creature painfully lifted herself up. She began to crawl towards the study where young Evangeline stood frozen in fear, tears streaming down her face as she squeezed her eyes shut. The grotesque version of her mother grew closer and closer, evoking a deepening sense of dread within the child. Each step from Genevieve's form rattled the house and left bloody, pus-soaked footprints on the ground. When she finally made it to her horror-stricken daughter, Genevieve reached out a chubby, wet hand. It brushed across Evangeline's face, which caused the young child to cry louder and harder. "Shh!" the creature choked out, its voice a mixture of familiarity and horror, causing Evangeline to shake violently. "Evangeline, I will take care of you, daughter." Reluctantly, Evangeline slowly opened her eyes and found herself face to face with the monster that resembled her mother. Her chin trembled and she reached a hand out to touch her mother's black, stringy hair. "Mommy?" Evangeline whispered, her voice trembling with uncertainty. The monster, her mother, responded with a perverse smile, her sharp teeth coated in the blood of their family. "Come here, baby, I will protect you," Genevieve sputtered. She flopped her overweight and squishy body onto the ground, causing blood and mucus to slap onto the floor. Multiple appendages extended towards Evangeline, beckoning her to come lay beside her mother. Evangeline slowly, reluctantly, obeyed. As Evangeline lay next to her mother, multiple arms descended upon her, stroking her hair in a parody of comfort. A constant, low shushing emitted from her mother as she kept her promise of protecting her daughter, eager to groom her for the role she would eventually play in her sick, cosmic plan. The sound of the erupting room from the Holloway house, followed by the ejection of a man through the splintered wooden wall, caused alarm among those who lived nearby. The concerned citizens, unable to reach or catch sight of the family after such a violent event, contacted the authorities. In response, a pair of automaton officers were dispatched to investigate the house immediately. When they returned to the station with no new information, a full squad was mobilized within the hour. Genevieve slept peacefully. After minutes of relentless knocking and demanding that the door be opened, the officers resorted to using force, crashing through the entrance in a shower of splintered wood. With revolvers drawn, the 4 officers spread out around the house, their voices echoing through the halls as they called out the names of those who were supposed to reside within the house. As one of the officers cautiously entered the study, his eyes widened in disbelief and he nearly fainted. Before him lay a grotesque mass of stretched skin, blood, mucus, and bulging veins, accompanied by a tangle of protruding arms. It appeared to be sleeping. However, amidst this abomination, he noticed something that chilled him to his core, the body of a little girl, still alive. The sound of unwelcome footsteps awoke Genevieve, her primal instincts kicking in. "You shouldn't be here, Genevieve grumbled, her voice thick with malice as she lifted herself up, exposing her complete monstrous form to the officer, and leaving Evangeline vulnerable on the ground. Reacting quickly, the officer released a barrage of 6 bullets into the horrifying figure looming in front of him. Instead of screams of pain, the monster emitted a wet, choking laugh. She lunged at the officer with a ferocious speed, tearing his leg from his body and showering her in his blood. He howled in pain, alerting the other officers to the location of the monster. The three all rushed to his aid, firing their weapons at the abomination. Not even 18 more bullets could take down the creature. And soon the four officers lay lifeless, their bodies becoming nutrients to the monster, who devoured and grew relentlessly, forgetting all about the little girl who lay right behind her. Following her feast, Genevieve fell to the ground and sank into a deep slumber. She grunted and snored, spilling blood and mucus from all of her pores while she slumbered on her back. Standing over her mother's repulsive form, Evangeline wept silently, mustering the strength to keep herself upright. "I'm sorry, Mommy," she whispered before jumping on top of her mother's writhing body. Just as Genevieve began to awaken and comprehend the threat, Evangeline fought against her mother's desperate attempt to throw her off. Digging her hands into the fleshy chest, Evangeline plunged deeper, relishing the warm, wet blood engulfing her arms. Finally, she found her target, the pulsing, corrupted heart. Grasping firmly, she began to pull. A dozen of Genevieve's arms coiled themselves around her, pushing upward, aligning perfectly with Evangeline's hopes. The momentum of her upward thrust, gripping the monster's heart, yanked it through her mother's chest. Genevieve emitted a tormented, horrifying scream that shook the very foundations of the home. Evangeline threw the heart across the floor, and as it skittered across the hall, she sprinted towards the front door, narrowly escaping before Genevieve unleashed another earth-shattering howl, causing the entire house to crumble, burying her beneath the rubble. Breathing heavily and drenched in the blood of her deceased mother, Evangeline collapsed onto the grass next to Dr. Ravenscroft. She raised her gaze to the sky, unaware that the ancient deity that had possessed her mother had returned to the cosmic realm, its malevolence vanquished only for now. In the 3 grueling years that Evangeline Holloway had been alive, she had experienced more horrors than one should see in a lifetime. Although she was merely a toddler, she had the sense that she had been freed from the grasp of the evil that had rooted itself within her home, but the misery of her life was just beginning. Two months ago in Russia, a scheduled demolition of a high-rise took an unexpected turn when, a few minutes before explosives were due to go off, the entire building coiled like a snake and vanished in a cloud of dust and debris. The so-called optical illusion was explained as a chain reaction of explosives traveling down the building. Even more recent, sooner than a few weeks ago, a popular museum collapsed in Poland, derailing a train. Tragically, 12 people lost their lives. A couple of people who witnessed the event described seeing something very strange moments after the collapse. A spiral of dust and bricks emerging from the wreckage, only to vanish in the space between two buildings. What the general public don't know is that these were not accidents. They were worms. Probably. It's difficult to know for sure, but me and my associate believe they are becoming more active, which is an issue. Of course, when I say worm, I'm not talking about your garden worm or your woodworm or anything like that at all. What I'm talking about is possibly the most impressive creature on our planet. So impressive that they have hidden from us for millennia. So how do I know about them, and what exactly are they? Let me try and explain. I like to think it was fate which led me to this unfathomable world I now inhabit. But you could also say that I was in the right place at the right time. I'm not particularly smart or motivated. Before my world was changed forever, I worked in an office, in a warehouse. I was an administrator. To tell you the truth, I had no direction in life. I had no idea what I was supposed to do or feel. I was going through the motions, counting down the days and the hours, waiting for something to happen. I suppose you could say I was looking for something beyond myself, beyond the surface level in which people's lives usually operate. Maybe it was as simple as that seeking, which put me on the same path as my associate. One evening, I had to finish late at work due to missing some hours the day prior. As I made my way home by foot, I walked down the same industrial estate I did every day. It was autumn, and even though it was only about 7 or 8, the sky was black and the only lights were those shining from the tops of buildings and street lamps. Almost everyone had gone home by now. It was fairly quiet, just the rush of distant traffic. Quiet, until I began to feel the edges of my ear vibrating. You ever feel like you're hearing sounds that you can't hear? Like higher frequencies? That's what it felt like. I remember my ears popping and stumbling over the pavement onto a patch of grass, then looking around, bewildered. Moments later, a man in a black trench coat emerged from a large gate at the building opposite me. "You there? Come here. I need your help." His instructions sounded urgent yet friendly and casual at the same time. I wasn't sure what to make of it. What is it?" I asked, scratching my head. His hands ushered me in frantically, but his voice remained polite and pleasant. "Please?" My ears were ringing slightly as I stood up. For some reason, I began making the journey across the road towards him. "Is there a high-pitched sound?" I searched for reassurance from him. "Yes, don't worry, you're not going crazy." Before I'd even got to the gate, he produced this black box of sorts, like some kind of sound system. That was my first impression of it. "Is that what's making the noise?" I asked, trying to decide whether to be annoyed. "Yep, and please hold it, we don't have much time." He thrust it into my arms as he sprinted inside the gate, yelling behind him, "Quick, come inside." Still heavily confused, I traced behind him carrying the heavy box until I found myself in a wide and empty car park, which he was now at the other end of already. When I finally caught up to him, he was yanking tons of thick black cable from the boot of his car. "What's 46 times 2? He asked, looping the wire around his arm. 92? Okay, double it. 184? What is it you need help with again?" "Set that frequency on the device." "I'm sorry, what?" I said with my face scrunched. "Just do it." The desperation in his voice made me trust him, and I looked down at the black box and saw it was on via a green LED display. I twisted the large knob until the display read 184. "Put the box down. I need you to help me carry this wire over to the building." "I'm sorry, what is going on here?" "No time to explain. You'll see very soon. Don't worry, everything is going to be okay." I don't know whether it was the pressure pulsing in my skull or what, but I did what he said. I put the box down and let him collapse the weight of the cables onto my arms. Then we both ran as fast as we could towards the front of the building. We connected up each of 12 cable ends to a part of the building he had marked. Then we retreated across the car park as he instructed. We were stood next to each other, when suddenly his hand held mine and squeezed it tight. "Are you ready for something spectacular?" I turned and looked at him terrified. Then what I can only describe as a nuclear bomb's worth of light blinded out everything in an intense flash. As it faded ever so slightly, I realized that there were gigantic spotlights set up on the wall behind us, focusing on the building. Then the ground began to feel uneasy. That's when I turned to him again. "Is the world ending?" I shouted over the perceived intense ringing in my ears. I must have looked like a little kid having a nightmare, yet astonishingly his face was full of unhinged laughter as he looked back and squeezed my hand even tighter. The ground was noticeably shaking now. Not by much, but just enough to scare me into closing my eyes for a second and brace for something apocalyptic. But when nothing happened after a few seconds, courage or curiosity forced my eyes open again. What I saw would change my life forever. It's hard to describe what I saw. Picture a massive office block unraveling like gigantic three-dimensional Tetris pieces as a waterfall of dust cascades to the ground. That doesn't even grab 1% of the energy of it. A behemoth of glass, concrete, and steel rising like a self-replicating Rubik's Cube, towering into the night sky while the powerful lights gave it an eerie and celestial glow. "Holy fucking shit!" I screamed. "What the fuck is happening?" "That, my friend, is a worm." "A fucking what?" "A worm!" He laughed maniacally as his head turned upwards to face it. Suddenly, the great churning mass lurched to the side, followed by a loud crashing sound as the entire wall and gate to our left flopped over like cardboard. "It's moving," he yelled, taking a few steps towards the car as his head followed it. "I can see that," I shouted sarcastically as my mouth hung wide open. "Quick, get in the car, we have to follow it." "We have to what?" "Follow it," he said, sprinting towards the vehicle across the car park. "Come on." Next thing I know, we are darting it down the industrial estate, chasing the tail of this monstrous mass, dodging stray chunks and things that it's spewing out behind it. It's rising up and down so violently that our wheels leave the road several times. It's heading towards the main road. Brace yourself. By the time we reach the end of the industrial estate, the thing is barreling along at ridiculous speeds. Some kind of rock hits our windshield and splinters half the glass, but it doesn't penetrate it as it's made out of some kind of impact-resistant material. The thing passes the main road in a split second, disappearing between the trees. That's when he slams the brakes. "What now?" I ask, somehow just as involved as he is in this escapade. He's silent for a second. I think it's going to the scrapyard, he says before flooring it again. We can intercept it. On the way to the scrapyard, I start throwing out questions. What are we trying to do? Capture it? His responses were short and rushed. Nope. You can't capture a worm. It can embed itself into anything. You put it inside a box, it will just make itself the box. So then we're trying to kill it? That's also a negative. We're just testing my tracking software so we can keep an eye on it. And then what? And then we kill it. So what exactly is a worm? Have you ever seen those diagrams of human nerve systems? I think so. Well, that's what a worm looks like. It's like a living nervous system that can wire itself into anything, giving it an exoskeleton of whatever it desires. Why have I never heard about them before? Well, there's many reasons. For one, they're very clever creatures, experts at hiding. That one we just saw didn't seem too good at hiding. That's because we lured it out, that setup you helped me with. It's a special technique I use to find them. You do this as a job? No, not really, a hobby. Almost there now. As we pull into the scrapyard, everything seems still. The ringing in my ears has died down and it's dark. We circled the scrapyard a couple times before I spoke up. I think we lost it. No, it's still here. For a moment, the distant whir of traffic evaporates, and everything is silent save a dog barking. I try to listen for it. We'll leave it here for now. Not much we can do until we have the tools. We can't kill it here? Absolutely no chance in hell. Then what are we doing here? This, he says, showing me a cellular panel with a flickering dot. I can track them now. That's important. You risked both our lives and the public so you could track a giant worm? Well, when you put it that way, it makes me feel bad, but yes. I shook my head in disapproval. Unbelievable. And there was me thinking you were some kind of hero. Well, I'm glad you don't think that, because the last thing I need is some lost son who needs a father figure. However, I do need an assistant. Someone who can help me do my job better. After today? Absolutely no way, was my reply. 2 days later, I quit my job to join him. My associate, let's call him Nick, was a genius. Sometimes I thought his intelligence really bordered on the supernatural, the way he explained things with lightning wit. He'd figured all this worm business out by himself about a year ago, and had been hunting and studying them ever since. He didn't like talking about himself that much, though. I still don't know much about him, I just know that I like him. A lot. He told me a lot about the worms, how apparently they had likely been responsible for structural disassembly going back thousands of years, but if so, how didn't we know about them sooner? For one, he said, worms are unofficially psychic. Being a gigantic assembly of nerves, they are extremely sensitive to their environment, able to recede at the slightest risk of danger. If you somehow suspected a worm in your wall and tried to hammer at it, for example, the creature would have sensed your intent to do so long before you even took your first swing. The only way to surprise them is to jam their neurological system via complicated techniques that I will not disclose here. What is their purpose? To survive, just like any creature. The worm diet is very rudimentary, requiring only warmth and light to sustain themselves. However, as they grow, they need ever larger amounts. Really massive worms migrate to larger buildings, where they can feed off the increase in energy footfall and their neurological pathways can continue to branch out. Their size is theoretically limitless. The electricity grid has been a great innovation for them in this regard. Nick theorizes they've been gorging on it for a long time, slurping up the radiation in our modern world like milkshake through a straw, accelerating their growth to levels unseen in the history of their evolution. This is potentially bad news for humanity. One building falling down every few months isn't the end of the world. Tornadoes and natural disasters will trump that easily. But if things escalate beyond a point, if the worms get too big, too quickly, as far as I know, it's only me and Nick monitoring the worms. We're trying our best to figure out what's going on. We're trying to save the world. My name is Milton. I am 32, 5 feet 9, and weighed 175 pounds. Now I am probably about 100 pounds at time of writing this. Until recently, I have had a perfect medical history. The worst health I've ever had was the flu when I was 16. What has happened recently is scaring me. I was doing my morning run, got a good sweat on, pushed myself harder than usual and started sweating real bad. After I got home, I felt a subtle burning, stinging pain on my skin. I thought it was just the sweat combined with the heat of my apartment, so I went to take a shower. I stripped down and started up the water. While I waited for the shower to heat up, I glanced at the mirror and noticed something odd. There were patchy red streaks coming from my forehead, lines of raw skin and dead flakes falling from my hairline like vines crawling down a tree. It looked worse than it felt. I decided I would moisturize after my shower. I went to feel the water with my hand and immediately recoiled away. It was extremely hot, like scorching. But this complex did have finicky water temperatures at times, so I thought it was just another one of those days. I had to shower, so I just decided to suck it up and hop in. As the water hit my body, it didn't roll off and rinse me off. It felt like it was cutting through every inch of me. Thousands of needles pushed in and twisted. I couldn't take it for another second. I jumped out without even getting any soap on me and dried off. I felt chills up my spine when I wrapped myself in my towel, but what I saw again in the mirror scared me worse. My body was covered in streaks and blots of that patchy dry skin. I felt tender and coarse and just needed to lay down. When I got to my bed, I felt clammy and sore like I had a fever. I stayed naked in the towel and made sure I had no water on my body. Every drop felt like acid. The room was hazy, dark, and humid. I tried to get some rest. Maybe I was coming down with something. Would explain why the skin was extra sensitive, I thought. Napping felt impossible. It was taxing and more draining than if I stayed awake. When I opened my eyes, waves of pain came in. My eyes weren't dry, they were watering. The moisture hurt so bad that I began to cry, which only made it worse, of course. The salty burn wasn't as bad as the drowning sensation in my eyes. Like when you dive in a public pool with too much chlorine and keep your eyes open. At this point, I was horrified. I squinted my eyes as I stumbled back to the bathroom to the medicine cabinet. I grabbed some ibuprofen to ease the pain. I threw it to the back of my throat, trying to take it dry, but I began to cough and choke on it. I needed to down it with something, so I grabbed my bottle of water from my run and took a swig. I immediately threw up. Not just the pill, but everything in my stomach felt like it shot out from my gut to the floor. Drinking felt like pouring boiling sludge down my throat. On my hands and knees, I cried as I looked at the bloody, stinging puddle dripping from my hands. I needed help. Wiping off the bile chunks, I ran to my phone on the bed. Running while barely able to see is hard enough, but exerting any energy made me dizzy and I fell. Hard. I cracked my skull on the corner of the bed frame. My brain felt like it was in a boxing match with my skull and lost. My ears rang and my head felt numb. When I went to feel the gash, the pain swept in like a tsunami. The blood on my fingertips and my skull amplified the pain from the canoe in my head more and more. Building and building as I screamed like an air raid siren. It was as if my body became self-aware of every liquid inside of it. Under my skin was lava, coursing through my veins and around my bones, in my bones, through my teeth and eyes and bladder. In that moment, it decided it didn't want that liquid inside me. It needed all of it out. I wouldn't have been able to go to the bathroom if I wanted. My body couldn't get off the floor. The urge to urinate wasn't even a choice. Before I knew it, my genitals felt like they were being peeled from the inside out and scorching my pelvis as urine and blood drained out onto the floor. I wanted to scream and cry, but I knew it would make it worse. So I bit my lip and pressed my eyelids shut as the pain continued on. My body was a war zone fighting against itself. I wasn't even my own body anymore. I was in some body that I hated and it hated me back. I was observing and experiencing something trying to kill me. I was a victim to this flesh suit of horror, and all I was doing is wearing it. I think I passed out shortly after. I don't know how much time passed, but when I woke up, the pain felt muted but definitely present. The body had blood, pus, mucus, and sweat oozing from every pore and orifice. When I decided to lift this body from the floor, it ended its ceasefire and lit up every nerve ending with pain. The whole body was one giant cramp and fluid, soaking it in gasoline. When it stepped, it felt like weights were tied around each leg. I pushed the body to the phone and dialed 911. Holding the phone was too much for it, so the phone was put on speaker and the operator answered. Or at least I think it did. The call timer appeared blurry on the screen as muffled words bounced off of the fluid in the body's ears. The canals were flooded and overflowing. I went to speak, but all that exited the mouth was air and a raspy wheeze. The body couldn't take it anymore and collapsed to the floor. I moved the eyes towards what remained of the wilted thing I called a hand. Red and raw, skin tearing itself down just for new sensitive skin to take its place to be melted away again. The body was nailed to the ground from the weight and pain. It laid its head down and let the eyelids close to keep out any moisture as if it would do any good. I woke up again and managed to get the body to sit up. My skin was burning slowly and the fluid resting. I took this time to check my phone. The operator must have hung up since the call was not going. If I did even call, I don't know at this point. I'm seeing shadows and mirages through the sunken holes I once called eyes. The dehydration is simultaneously killing me with the hydration in my body. I don't know if it is a bad call to spend possibly my final moments posting this, but I have no hope in getting help at this point. My only hope is that no one else has what I do. If it is contagious or a disease or divine punishment or a sick demonic joke, I don't know. But I hope this never happens to anyone else. As I'm making this public, I suppose I should probably let you all know who I am. The residents here call me a lot of things, some not so pleasant, but I won't share those. My name is Alexander, but I honestly don't really mind what you call me if you need to call me anything at all. I work as the manager of an apartment complex. It's nothing really that interesting. A lot of paperwork and a lot of sitting around doing nothing until a resident needs me, or I need to handle a problem of some kind. One of the perks is that I have my own apartment here. Rent-free, so I get to save some cash at least. They're lenient with pets too, so I was able to bring my cat Soot. She's a sweetheart. There is an odd thing about where I work though, something that I can't really explain how it works, but it just does. Where I work both exists and doesn't exist, like some strange in-between state. Cryptic, I know, but let me try and explain it a little more. Normal mail can show up here and be sent from here just fine, as long as it's properly postmarked and such. Sometimes the occasional letter or package gets lost, but that's not my problem. However, if you try giving out the address to someone, it can't be found. GPS of any kind can't pick up where we are, and even if you give verbal directions, you practically need to hold someone's hand to come and find this place. And honestly, God help you if you order food to come right to your apartment. I've had to guide so many delivery people to apartments that it's become a routine answer for me on the phone to say, "All right, what time is your food coming down the street?" I wouldn't suggest trying to come and find this place. You'll most likely drive yourself mad. Unless you're looking to move in here, then I'll offer assistance to finding this location. I just hope you don't mind having some pretty odd neighbors. As for how I ended up being the manager of this place, I really just needed a job and I wanted something that wasn't retail or food service. I'd been there, done that, and honestly, I'll never go back to that. I saw an ad online about a complex needing a new manager and, having some managerial experience, I put in for it. Had the interview, went normal enough, and got the job within 2 weeks. I didn't know anything was wrong with this place when I got the job. It only started being noticeable when people were saying they legitimately couldn't find this place, even showing that it didn't appear at all on Google Maps. Where it was supposed to be was just empty, or the image would be corrupted. Then when I started actually meeting the residents, I began to understand a bit more, but I'll get into that on another day. The job pays well, I get a rent-free place to stay. I get to keep my cat, so I don't really have room to complain. I'll share noteworthy things as they happen, though. Maybe it'll give me something to do during my downtime. I know I spoke about the weird behavior of the apartment complex, but I didn't really say much about the residents themselves. I can't really give away resident information, but what I can do is give some vague ideas on what it is I mean by calling them strange. First of all, I want to say that people do live here. What I mean is people, normal people, human people. At least some of the residents are human people. I saw someone comment about the complex not being the best for people who have disabilities, but that's why for all residents I give them my personal cell phone number, so if they can't reach me at the desk, they can reach me directly. I've picked up food deliveries and stood outside on the sidewalk as a living beacon for taxis and Ubers. The complex has elevators too and some pretty decent accommodations, so for those of you worried about your fellow humans, I've got you covered. A decent amount of the residents, though, maybe even a majority, are not human. They can look human, they can walk and talk and behave like humans do, but they are not human. For example, one of the residents here looks perfectly human. Just think of what a human looks like, and yeah, that's what they look like. The only difference between this resident and the rest of us is that they have the same head-turning capability as an owl. If you've seen the way an owl can turn their head a full 180 or even 270, this resident can do that without any problems whatsoever. Another resident has a constantly changing eye color. What I mean by that is that every single time this resident blinks, their eyes are a completely different color. I've seen their eyes cycle from brown to green to blue to red before, all during the course of a single conversation. I genuinely don't know if they control what color or if it's entirely random. Never thought to ask. Those are just the ones who look human but have small quirks. That's not even covering the residents that actually need to put effort into appearing human. I've got residents with wings, tails, fangs, multiple eyes, multiple mouths, horns, unnatural skin colors, and some that can do straight-up body horror level of creepy things. Climbs walls, got a resident like that. A living voodoo doll, got a resident like that too. Shapeshifter, I've had so many I can't even keep track. If you think of a non-human sentient entity type, chances are you've rented out a suite to someone like them before. They're mostly civil. But just like humans, you got the Karens and the Chads and the Kyles. You know, the type of people that like to just be a complete nuisance with no regard for other people. Anyway, yeah, the complex is home to people from all over. Even people you never thought could exist. I've got stories to tell about my time here so far, so don't worry, this won't be the last you hear from me. Now, if you'll excuse me, 429 needs me to fix their window for the 20th time. I've gone over the way the building itself is weird, and how the residents themselves are strange. But I didn't touch on the pets that these residents have. You already know that this place is lenient with pets, but when I say pets, I bet you think of the typical birds, cats, dogs, snakes, hamsters, etc., right? Well, just like how most of the residents are inhuman, several of the pets that we house here are also weird. Now, don't get me wrong. Even some of the non-human residents enjoy the same pets we do, but there are also pets that aren't anything you've seen before. One resident has something that looks like a cat, but it's covered in glowing fungus and has 3 eyes. Its name is Findle, and honestly it's actually pretty sweet, you just need to be careful when petting it. I want to say it's roughly the size of a full-grown hen. I've actually been talking with this resident about setting up a possible play date between Findle and Soot one day. We're still working out the details. Another resident, the one with the color-changing eyes, has a bird-like pet named Gentoo. It looks like a mix between an African gray parrot and a peacock, and it has an extra eye on its throat. It's pretty timid around new people, and even though the resident has lived here for about a year, only last week did Gentoo let me get anywhere close to the cage. The resident did reassure me that it took them about 1.5 years to get Gentoo to this point, so it's a slow process. Some other pets include multi-headed limbed animals of various types, pets that can turn into pure liquid at will, and even ones that don't match anything that you've ever seen before. For example, there's this one tenant who has a pet that's literally a pile of ashes, but it can shuffle around and eat on its own. I've seen it myself. Weird stuff, but still allowed since the resident takes care of it. So yeah, if you want to move here but are worried about whether or not we'd allow you to keep your pet, I can assure you that we will as long as you actually take care of the thing. Had to evict a resident once that refused to clean up after their slime, almost lost an eye over that argument. Just take care of your pet and you'll be fine. Speaking of that, you have no idea how much of a pain it was to try and find a way to allow people to have specific pets that won't cause deposit losing damage. We can't do the usual rules like you see at other apartments because of the wide variety of pets that we can get here. I have been able to optimize the application form to have pretty broad categories of pets so I can find the right lease type. But even then you have people that'll lie about what pet they have or sneak in a pet after they've already signed the lease. And that is its own headache. I tend to think of myself as a pretty easygoing person, but even I have my limits, and making my job harder for no reason is pretty up there. And don't even get me started on trying to repair apartments after someone moves out and their pet has trashed it. Do you know how difficult it is to find a cleaning and repair company that won't ask questions about what caused the damage? Funnily enough, that's how I ended up delving down the rabbit holes of non-human-owned companies. But they're super finicky to deal with, so I tend to just try my best to make up excuses for the human-owned ones. Overall, I don't care if someone has a cat, dog, snake, slime, lava snail, whatever it is as a pet, as long as they take care of it properly and don't cause massive damage to their apartment. Hell, if you're not even from this city, I'll help you look for shops that sell supplies for your otherworldly companion, because I've heard from other residents how much of a pain it can be. I've seen enough by now to give good tips and locations after all. "Have you ever heard of the Meteor Man?" whispered the maintenance worker. His young trainee nodded, eyes widening. He had grown up in the city, where the Meteor Man was an infamous and unavoidable urban legend. The trainee had first heard the tale around a campfire when he was 10. Since then, he had heard many different versions of the story at sleepovers, high school football games, and while smoking cigarettes outside the mall. The story goes that the man had thrown himself off a building, but when he arrived at the ground, it appeared like he had fallen from somewhere much higher than a building. People say it looked like he had fallen from somewhere in the outer atmosphere, as his body arrived to the street completely incinerated, even though he was never on fire. A knowing grin emerged above the maintenance worker's chin. He leaned back in his office chair, savoring the moment of anticipation before his treasured reveal. "Well, I met the man. Only days before he plummeted to the street, in fact." The maintenance worker pantomimed the scene with his right hand as he talked, index and middle finger acting as the Meteor Man, jumping off an invisible building to inevitably splat on the desk that separated the two men. "This is the building he fell from," he said, pausing afterwards for effect. "And he didn't jump off the top. Psycho broke through his own window, dropping 30 stories from his own apartment." The storyteller took a large gulp of lukewarm coffee. He looked down at the remaining liquid, which reminded him of his favorite part of the story, the part that only him and a few other people were aware of. "No one ever mentions the blackness, neither." The trainee leaned in, captivated. "What do you mean, blackness?" Nathan really believed he had accumulated everything. Like a prison warden leering down from the ramparts, he watched the laypeople, his metaphorical inmates, traverse the eroding city streets through the body-length window in his 30th-story high-rise bedroom. Financial circumstance incarcerated them. He was wealthy, liberated, and free. Through his affluence, his ungodly excess, he had severed those ties that bind. His perception of superiority was intoxicating. No dark brandy, nor sexual enterprising, nor synthetically perfected opioid could match the feeling that came with that perception. To Nathan, they did not even come close. The strongest cocaine that money could buy, barely even registered as pleasurable when compared to the inebriation of perceived supremacy. The white powder was a sickly red-yellow flicker of an old match, consumed and assimilated in an instant by the roaring, draconic inferno that was his ascendance from the common man. Alone in his newly purchased multi-million-dollar penthouse, he felt comfortable and sated. The elevation from the dregs of society made him safe, he mused. Laypeople were cannibals. Maybe not literally, but a desperate need forced them to tear each other limb from limb on a regular basis. The physical distance was a necessary security measure for a man of his financial stature. His life is perfect, the old man thought, although he still felt a little hollow. But to Nathan, that was just his killer instinct, his boundless ambition to climb one more rung up the societal ladder. If he didn't feel a little hollow, what would drive himself to accumulate more? He would get up every morning at 7 and start his routine by moving to view the city streets from his bedroom. The window he did this from was ostentatiously large, sleek, and stainless. It was the wall that separated Nathan from the outside atmosphere, running the length of the floor and all the way up to the ceiling. From his lonely perch, he would observe the people beneath him, daydreaming that they were ants wriggling and squirming futilely beneath the shadow of his waiting foot. Sometime later, his morning vigil would be expectantly interrupted by a call. His driver letting Nathan know that he had arrived in the garage 30 floors below him. He would take one last long look, basking in his rapturous elevation before leaving for the day. As he approached sea level in the elevator, Nathan routinely experienced a sort of withdrawal. He would yearn to return to his spire mere moments after leaving it. The old man hated the space between his apartment and the car because of what it revealed to him. He felt powerful and vital when he was in his penthouse, impossibly high above the city and its people. He felt identically powerful and vital when he was masquerading as one of the partners at his law firm, which began the moment he entered the company car with his chauffeur. In the brief space between those places, however, he could feel the actual hideous truth, and it made him helpless and brittle. As that truth took hold, Nathan would experience a rush of primal nausea, followed by his palms becoming damp with sweat. It was a byproduct of the reality that he did his absolute damnedest to ignore, the reality that he was nothing, and he had nothing. Thankfully, navigating that existential space was less than 1% of his day. In the grand scheme of things, it was negligible and manageable. As soon as he was away from that truth, he'd push it as far back into his brainstem as it would go. The old man would have continued like this indefinitely, had the view from his high-rise not been obscured by an inky black veil, an unexplainable tenebrous curtain that fell over his window to the sounds of an inaudible and otherworldly standing ovation from a place beyond perception, and it marked the coming end of Nathan's brief and forgettable stage play. When his digital alarm sounded that fateful morning, Nathan awoke utterly disorientated. His 1,600-square-foot master bedroom was unexplainably sunless. The old man widened and squinted his eyes, trying to adjust to his lightless surroundings, but to no avail. Nathan could appreciate the faint glow of the light coming from the hall that led to his kitchen in the top left-hand corner of his vision, but otherwise the room was pitch black. He sat upright in bed, motionless, struggling to compute the change. For obvious reasons, he never had his bedroom window shades drawn, not wanting to block his view of the surfs below. He had contemplated removing the shades entirely, but was ultimately too lazy to do it himself. Nathan began troubleshooting the possibilities. What if a storm had rolled in? It felt unlikely. Even if the cityscape was enveloped by some exceedingly dense overcast, the millions of small urban lights would have provided some illumination, like a glimmering swarm of fireflies breaking through a moonless night. He considered the possibility that the city's power grid had gone haywire, and it was still the middle of the night, despite what his alarm clock read. But the entire city without power? That felt impossible. Moreover, if everyone was without electricity, what light could he faintly appreciate coming from his kitchen? The only explanation he had left was that he was in a vivid, if not exceptionally odd, dream. So Nathan sat and impatiently waited for this dream to abate. An excruciating 45 seconds passed without such luck. Unsure of what else to do, he blindly fumbled to locate his cell phone plugged in across the room, swearing and cursing at the Almighty and the universe for these new and unfair phantasmagoric circumstances. After some slapstick trips and falls appreciated by no one, he found his phone and activated the flashlight. Carefully, he used the makeshift lantern to guide himself out into his kitchen. With compounding befuddlement, Nathan found his kitchen bathed in the rising sun's light, the same as every other day. Standing at the end of the hallway that connected the two rooms, his disorientated state glued him to the wood tiling. He swiveled his head toward the void that used to be his bedroom, then back to the normal-appearing kitchen, back to the void, and so on a dozen times. This repetitive, cartoonish appraisal failed to illuminate Nathan, and was another comedic beat that, unfortunately, went unappreciated. He decided the next best course of action was to involve the complex's concierge in the troubleshooting. At the very least, they would serve as a punching bag to direct his confused rage toward. That day's concierge was thoroughly desensitized to the inane tantrums of the obscenely wealthy, but this complaint surpassed petty disapproval. It was downright absurd. Finally, there was someone to appreciate the comedy of the situation. "Your window is malfunctioning, sir?" A maintenance worker made his way up to the 30th floor high-rise. He had dropped what he was doing to attend to Nathan's outlandish complaint, but was still met with righteous indignation when he opened the door because of the perceived delay in arrival. No response would have been quick enough for Nathan, however. Even if the worker had teleported to his front door, the old man would still have been frustrated that the worker didn't have the courtesy to teleport inside his condominium, saving this apparently important man valuable time by eliminating the need to answer the door. Nathan led the worker to his bedroom and outstretched his arm, placing his hand palm up in the darkness's direction. It was a gesture meant to imply the darkness was somehow the worker's fault, while simultaneously asking what he intended to do to fix it. The worker looked at the bedroom, then back at Mr. Suthering quizzically. Nathan petulantly doubled down on his previous gesticulation, reperforming it with more gusto and vigor, rather than wasting his words on a blue-collar man. The worker then scanned the area for signs of alcoholism, drug abuse, or mental illness. When he did not find any liquor bottles, hypodermic needles, or empty pill bottles, implying that the old man had missed a refill of something important, he decided his only course of action was to inspect the malfunctioning window. He made his way into the bedroom and towards the problem. Seeing that he had the young trainee spellbound, the maintenance worker's grin found enough real estate to somehow grow even larger. He downed the rest of his coffee, winked, and then resumed. "Yeah, the crotchety old coot couldn't see the inside of his bedroom. Could see everything else just fine, though. I could tell he was freaking out. I mean, I understand why. It made no earthly sense. If there was something physically wrong with him, all of his vision should have been affected. But it was just his bedroom. Said it was pitch black, like the whole damn thing was enveloped by some kind of fog that only he could see. The young trainee was stunned, awestruck even. It was like meeting a celebrity's cousin, someone close enough to have inside information but still far enough removed to not know the whole story, keeping the mystique intact. I only saw him one time after that, or rather I heard him, howling like a banshee the night before he became the Meteor Man. To Nathan, it looked like the worker was swallowed whole by the miasma of his bedroom. Once again, he was dumbstruck. Nathan grabbed his phone, pointed the flashlight into the darkness of the bedroom, and cautiously entered behind the man. The old man watched as the worker navigated the room without question or concern. He stepped over loose items of clothing on the floor and avoided stubbing his toe on the oversized bed frame that held Nathan's king-sized bed. Nathan stood at the edge of the darkness, watching him perform these feats without the help of any auxiliary illumination. The phone flashlight he held could not penetrate entirely through the ink that filled the volume of his bedroom from where he was standing, making the worker intermittently disappear and reappear from the blackness. It was like he was spelunking deep within the earth, only to find the worker was some subterranean humanoid who had only ever known darkness, granting him the ability to attend to his duties with no need for light. Eventually, unsure of how to proceed, the worker returned to the bedroom entrance where Nathan stood petrified by confusion. The sight of the old man, confounded and afraid of seemingly nothing, holding a phone light forward into a room that was already damn bright from the morning sun, did manage to spark some pity in him. "Do you need me to call you an ambulance, buddy?" Of course, this only re-invoked the old man's rage. While in the middle of an unfocused tirade, his phone vibrated, causing Nathan to throw it to the ground and jump back as if it had spontaneously metamorphosed into a tarantula. His driver was calling. He had arrived in the garage. Nathan promptly kicked the worker out of his home, trying to let wrath mask his embarrassment over the situation. He threw on a suit and tie, finding the clothes using a large flashlight he procured from a cupboard. As he was walking out the door, he had an idea. Nathan returned to his apartment, stuffing a pair of binoculars into his briefcase before leaving for the day. Instead of going to the garage, he went to the city sidewalk that faced his penthouse. Through his binoculars, he slowly counted floors to his apartment complex until he hit 30. From the outside, he could see into his apartment, recognizing his wardrobe and other furniture visible through the windows. Nathan gasped, letting the binoculars tumble to the ground. Why could he not appreciate the darkness from the outside? Dazed by the morning's events, he sleepwalked into the company car, hoping this all represented a transient stroke or unexplainable optical illusion. When he arrived home that evening to find deathly blackness still oozing from his bedroom, he had to face the reality that this phenomenon was neither a stroke nor an illusion. For the first few days, the old man mitigated the unbridled existential terror by filling the catacomb that used to be his bedroom with various electrical light sources. Each light source, in isolation, was much too weak to cut through the haze. Nathan required an absolute military cavalcade of fluorescents to stand a chance of fully seeing his bedroom. With his lights set up and on, he tried to sleep, but it was a futile effort. After about an hour, like clockwork, the light bulbs in his bedroom would explode no matter the source that housed them. Unable to relax without every corner of his bedroom illuminated and constantly awakened by the tiny implosions, he laid his head on the sofa farthest from his bedroom. The entrance of the bedroom was, thankfully, still visible for monitoring from the sofa. This change in tactics afforded him a few minutes of shut-eye, but only a few. He had run out of spare light bulbs by the time he had migrated to the sofa. To Nathan's distress, he was forced to give up on pushing back the oppressive darkness. He constantly opened his eyes to ensure the ink was not spreading, vigilant as well for signs of movement that could represent a malicious entity emerging from somewhere in that tomb. The ink did not spread, and no phantoms were ever born from the darkness. Despite this good fortune, night after night, Nathan got less and less sleep. Although nothing appeared out of the darkness, something eventually manifested from inside of it, and it turned his blood to ice. Abruptly and unceremoniously, a noise began to emanate from his bedroom. Short bursts of rhythmic tapping, the unmistakable sound of knuckles rapping on glass, the horrifically familiar reverberations of human knocking. At first, hours passed between instances of the knocking. Nathan tried to convince himself it was just sleep deprivation playing tricks on his aching psyche. But what was at first an hour's reprieve from the uncanny disturbance then became only minutes, and what was initially the sound of one hand knocking on glass eventually became two, then five, and then the noise was so chaotic that Nathan was unable to discern how many knocks were overlapping with each other. At wit's end, Nathan arrived at a sort of tormented frenzy that almost could be mistaken for courage. He jumped up from the sofa and descended into his bedroom, turning on the kitchen light en route and wielding only his phone for protection. When he entered, he could tell that the knocking was coming from directly outside his bedroom window. As he approached the window, however, the knocking slowed, stopping completely when he was a few feet from it. Directing his phone light at the glass, he could only see darkness outside the window, simultaneously framing a faint silhouette of himself reflecting off the inside surface. Nathan then stood statuesque in the black silence, unsure of how to proceed, when the bulb in his phone erupted into sparks. In a fraction of a second, the miasma subsumed him. The heat from the explosion burnt the palm of his right hand, pain causing him to throw the phone somewhere unseen into the mire that used to be his bedroom. Compared to before, he could no longer orient himself to his position in the bedroom by the gleam of the kitchen light. He simply could not see it. He couldn't see anything. Nathan desperately tried to find the way out, but without light, the size of his bedroom had become seemingly infinite. He started by walking carefully in the direction opposite to where he thought the window was, but after a few steps, a sharp pain like a cat bite inflamed his right ankle, bringing him to his knees with a yelp. Now crawling, he kept moving away from the window. He did not pivot to the right or left, yet he never encountered a wall or the hallway, no matter how far he went. Nathan believed he had been pulling himself forward for hours. The carpet began to feel wet and sticky with an odorless substance. As he kept moving, the carpet then seemed to transition into grass and soil. When a flare of madness overtook Nathan, he attempted to pull what he thought was grass out of the ground. Instead of the grass-like substance yielding from the soil, each piece stayed firmly tethered in place while creating multiple lacerations into the flesh of Nathan's left palm as he dragged it upwards. The sensation was as if he had forcefully run the inside of his hand along multiple razor blades. Nathan reflexively brought his hand to his mouth, tasting metallic blood as it leaked from him. Defeated, he curled into a ball and fell on his side, resigned to eventually starving in that position rather than facing more of the abyss. As his head touched the floor, a familiar vibration and a dim light against his cheek startled him. He picked up his lost phone, finding it difficult to answer an incoming call because of the blood that had oozed onto the screen. Looking at his phone, tinted crimson through his murky blood, he could discern that he had missed a call from his driver, and that it was 8 in the morning. In abject horror, Nathan recalled looking at his phone before he foolishly entered the darkness, and it had read 6:45 a.m. He had been in his bedroom for only a little over an hour. Utilizing the dim light of the phone screen, Nathan attempted to determine where he was and how close he had been to making it out into the hallway. Instead, the light revealed his reflection in the window, staring back at him, indicating he had not moved anywhere at all. When he found his way out of the bedroom turned schizophrenic nightmare, he fell to the floor of the hallway and sobbed. After he had no more tears to give, Nathan numbly examined himself, looking to evaluate his injuries. There was a tiny burn on his right hand from where his phone's exploding bulb had scorched it, but he did not see the gashes on his left palm. He did not see the blood on his phone. He felt his right ankle for evidence of the perceived cat bite, but he found only smooth, intact skin. In a raving panic, he determined he was most likely insane from a brain tumor and needed a physician. The next step in that plan would be to go to the garage and find his driver, who would then deliver him to the hospital. Nathan spilled out his front door, enjoying the welcome relief of his escape, though this was cut short by the resumed sound of knocking on glass. He turned his body in the doorway to face the obsidian depths of his bedroom and its incessant knocking, and then he screamed into it out of fear, exhaustion, and anger. When he stopped, things were briefly silent, and Nathan felt a shred of pride rise in his chest as he earnestly believed that he had managed to strike back and injure a fathomless void. After a moment, another scream broke the quiet, exactly identical to Nathan's, but it was not coming from him. It was coming from his bedroom, twice as loud as before. He turned to sprint towards the elevator, but the knocking resumed with a heightened ferocity. The old man assumed that creating distance from the window, from the sound, would dampen the hellish drumming in accordance with natural law. As he created space from the window, however, the knocking only grew more deafening in his ears. When he reached the elevator threshold, the noise was like helicopter blades thrumming inches from his head. Nathan wanted to escape, but he knew implicitly that the only time the knocking had ceased was when he was next to the window. Despite this, he pushed forward and entered the elevator, managing to press the button for the garage. He had only reached the 27th floor when the cacophony became unbearable. Like his skull was perpetually splintering into thousands of fragments from the pressure the sound created in his mind, but his brain did not have the mercy to implode alongside the pain and actually kill him. He wildly hammered the open door button and ran the 3 flights of stairs back up to the 30th floor, down the hallway and back into his penthouse. "So, picture this," the maintenance worker said, suppressing a smoker's cough as he did. "I'm working on the 26th floor, minding my own business, when I determine some electrical issue is actually originating 1 floor below. So I walk over to the stairwell, and when I open the door, I hear some lunatic screaming nonsense from a floor or 2 above. I didn't see the guy, so I don't know for certain, but it sure as shit sounded like the Meteor Man." The trainee broke through his amazement long enough to ask a follow-up question. "Do you remember what he was screaming about?" The maintenance worker contemplated the question. No one in recently memory had asked him about the contents of the Meteor Man's ravings, so he had to dig deep to try to recall what he said. Something about an Elise. He was asking her to stop knocking and that he was sorry. Whatever all that means. With all sense of self-preservation erased and overwritten by the need for the knocking to abate, Nathan rocketed headfirst into the miasma of his bedroom. Guided by the dim light of his phone screen, he located where he stood before, but the knocking did not cease this time. He moved a few steps closer, but still the knocking did not cease. With no more space between himself and the window, he pressed his face against the glass, looking to where the street should be, and the knocking finally lifted and dissolved into the ether. The relief again was short-lived. With his eyes directed downward, he saw the sidewalk adjacent to his building, framed and isolated from the rest of the city by a familiar blackness. An enormous gathering of people gazed up singularly at Nathan, elbow to elbow and unmoving, but they were grotesquely malformed. The people below Nathan had bulbous heads sporting inhuman features. Their eyes dominated the top of their faces, and their mouths dominated the bottom of their faces, and there was barely any visible skin to demarcate the 2 characteristics. Their mouths were that of a lamprey's, gaping and circular asymmetric teeth littering the cavity. Their eyes were compound and honeycombed like that of a fly or a praying mantis. Thousands of these abominations all stared up at Nathan, waiting. Finally, a chime sounded from an unknown location, and one of their numbers was lifted above the crowd onto their shoulders. The myriad slowly turned away from Nathan and towards the chosen one, and in horrific synchrony, they descended on that chosen one and viciously severed them into innumerable fleshy pieces. The creatures close enough to the carnage greedily filled their gullets with the remains. They inserted meat into their cavernous mouths, but they would not chew. Instead, the circles of teeth would spin and rotate, flaying and deconstructing the tissue until it could slide gently into their throats. The vision and the accompanying soundscape were mind-shattering, and Nathan drew his head back and closed his eyes. As soon as he did so, the knocking would resume at peak intensity, debilitating pressure finding home again in his skull. The pain would cause him to open his eyes and place his face against the glass to once again bear witness to whatever infernal rite was occurring on the ground below. The horrors would gaze up at him, patiently awaiting another chime to sound and signal sacrifice. When it did, he would watch the bloodletting until he could no longer, and then the knocking would find purchase in him again. This surreal cycle continued, with no signs of relenting, until a divine visage pressed its hand against the glass of Nathan's window from the outside. Amidst the hallucinogenic maelstrom, it took Nathan a few moments to recognize his ex-wife. Elise was somehow floating in the ether outside, curly brown locks swaying gingerly like wisps of air and a familiar set of green eyes meeting his. The couple had met in law school when Nathan's psychopathy was in its infancy. Initially, Elise had pulled him back from the brink, from the point where he would need to divest his identity as collateral for the chance at wealth and power. A year after meeting each other, they were wed, and there were talks of starting a family. In a pivotal moment, however, Nathan internalized what starting a family would mean for him. Children meant hospital bills, exponential living costs, and college tuitions. It wouldn't bankrupt him, not by a long shot, but it would lead to his devolution into one of the people on the sidewalk. As a common man, he would be constantly looked down upon from a high rise by some other devil. Nathan realized he could not and would not tolerate that judgment. Out of the blue, and with Elise 2 months pregnant, Nathan filed for divorce. Having divested his soul, no amount of pleading, reasoning, or suffering would ever return him to humanity. To his dying day, he had no idea what had become of his wife or his child. Although the old man would never know the truth, it was this: Elise had lived a long and difficult life. She raised a beautiful, hard-working daughter, but it had not been easy, and she had grown to resent her ex-husband with a white-hot, feverish intensity. Days before he became the Meteor Man, and minutes before the black mist arrived in Nathan's room, Elise passed away after a long fight with stomach cancer. In times of true duress, Nathan would still think of his ex-wife fondly, but only because the thought of her seemed to comfort and sedate him, not because he earnestly missed her. Elise reached out to him with her hand as if to say she had heard his agony and had come to deliver him salvation. Her fingertips touched the window's glass from the outside, and Nathan tried to phase his hand through the barrier to accept her offer. Elise watched him struggling, pushing his hands on different areas of the window, as if there was some invisible hole in the wall between them, and he only needed to locate it to survive. Eventually, Elise showed mercy. She slid her right hand through the window effortlessly and placed it lovingly on Nathan's cheek. For a third and final time, his relief was short-lived. She snapped her hand from his cheek to the back of his head, grabbed a thick and sturdy tuft of hair, and drove his head into the window from the opposite side, partially caving in the front of his skull and splintering the window with 2 sickening twin cracks. She paused, and then drove his head into the window again. And a third time, and in a grand finale, she shattered the window and pulled him through, held him by the back of the head so he could view the people in the city street from above one last time, and then she dropped him into the waiting maw below. "Did you get to see the crime scene?" the young trainee asked. "No, I didn't. I don't go up to the 30th floor much either. Not if I don't have to." The storyteller's mood had shifted from playful to somber. He looked away from the trainee as he wrapped up his part in the tale. "I don't know who Elise is, but sometimes I see the frame of a woman. Featureless black mist roaming the halls on the 30th floor. Whatever the Meteor Man had in life, it's hers now in death." And with that, he concluded the story, at least as he understood it. After Nathan had landed on the sidewalk, he was reduced to pulp and bone for all the passers-by to see. A final humiliation, to have it revealed in an outrageous spectacle that he was no god, that he was flesh just like everyone else. When the police entered his 30th-story high-rise, they found no darkness within. All they saw was a broken window, a hammer in his bedroom that had been used to shatter the glass, and the spot where Nathan Southering threw himself onto the asphalt below. The one nagging feature the police could not explain, however, was the state of the body on its arrival to Earth. The old man's flesh had been seared and charcoaled almost beyond recognition, yet there was no sign of a fire in his apartment, nor on the city street that he fell onto. This phenomenon was never scientifically explained, and the old man had no one willing to posthumously investigate the mystery for him. After his curtain call, Nathan did manage to retain a minor thread of infamy, not as a demigod of wealth and power, but instead as the legend of the Meteor Man, a nameless individual who seemingly plummeted to Earth from an impossible height in the outer atmosphere, incinerating any and all trace of who he once was. And that legend still lives on. I first heard of the Letling Room 9 years ago. I was a detective then, investigating the death of a brilliant physicist. Or should I say, former physicist. She had once studied dark energy at one of the top universities in the country. Yet one day she had abruptly quit with zero notice and never published again. In the chaos of her apartment there was, haphazardly placed amidst piles of papers with crossed-out equations and diagrams I couldn't even pretend to understand, a hastily scribbled note: "The man in the Letling Room is the only answer." I had flipped through her diary, curious if it had any clues as to who this mysterious man might be. In her diary, she wrote of a place called the Letling Room. She described it in precise, methodical detail. It is not large, about 7 by 5 meters, dusty, dimly lit, yet there is no lamp, candle, or any light source whatsoever to be seen, and no window or any means to let light in from outside. In fact, there is no door or any disruption in the smooth walls to indicate an entrance or exit. On the dusty wooden floorboards are piles of books and ornaments with strange writing on them, but the closer one looks, the blurrier they become, so it is impossible to say for certain what is in the books or what the ornaments depict. It is absolutely silent. There is but one piece of furniture in the room, a dusty, high-backed armchair facing away from me. I can't see who sits there, but it is axiomatically obvious to me that someone does, and he is the answer to every question I've tried to answer and failed. The man in the Letling room. She had, according to her diary, never been to the Letling room and seen it only once in a dream right before she quit her job, and then never again. But I sat down to read through the diary, and sure enough, she wrote about the Letling room constantly, in increasingly long and unhinged entries, trying desperately to derive an answer to various physics problems, a chaotic sea of matrices and numbers and Greek letters. But every single time, it would all come back to the same answer, repeatedly circled and underlined, sometimes with such vigor that it tore the page. The man in the Letling room. The final entry was comparatively short and to the point, a few days before her body was found. I give up. I've spent my entire life trying to understand why the universe is the way it is. It's the only thing I've ever had, the only thing that makes me happy. And the only answer that can ever make any sense is the man in the fucking Letling room. Fuck him and fuck all the therapists who just repeat he's not real like a broken record. Forget it. I'm done wasting my life. That physicist's death was officially ruled a suicide, brought on by paranoid schizophrenia. It was, I suppose, a fairly open and shut case. There was a note, an empty bottle of pills, no signs of foul play. Life moved on, and the Letling room drifted to the back of my mind as newer cases piled up, especially after I got married, moved across the country, and went private. Less mindless bureaucracy, more interesting cases that way. Not to brag, but I even managed to crack a couple of high-profile cases that had been cold for years. And I suppose I forgot about the man in the Letling room, for a while in any case. 3 years later, I was at a bar, 3 beers in and chatting with some random guy, an older gentleman named Ross, who was an archaeologist from the local university. He'd had a few more than I had and seemed all too happy to ramble on about his students and his work. He'd apparently spent over 20 years studying some Bronze Age tribe in the Caucasus and trying to figure out why they'd suddenly disappeared 3,200 years ago. But that's all in the past, he told me. Today was my last day. I'm retiring and heading up north to my cousin's farm. Okay, congratulations, but why now? Weren't you just on the cusp of figuring out what happened to the Carganians? I said. On the cusp? Said Ross. Nah, man, I figured it out completely. Hell, I figured out why everything that's happened in human history has happened. You could even say I've solved history itself. No need to keep working on it. I got into this field to understand it all, and now I do. Something seemed off about that, especially the passion and conviction he said it with. Could just be a drunk guy rambling in a bar, but you don't get far as a PI by shrugging off clues as just drunk ramblings. So tell me, why has all this shit gone down the way it has? I said. He grinned broadly and clapped me on the shoulder. Why, the man in the Letling room, of course, he said with a hearty chuckle. Bam. It hit me in an instant like a bucket of ice water to the face. I remembered the details of that one case from 3 years ago and 3,000 miles away. Dead physicist, suicide, the haunting, eerie description of the place she called the Letling room. I narrowed my eyes. And who the hell, I said slowly, is the man in the Letling room? He's the answer to everything I've been trying to figure out, said Ross. He downed the rest of his beer, belched, and continued. See, a couple weeks ago I was smoking a blunt and started hallucinating, which is weird because weed doesn't normally do that to me, you know? But I saw this creepy little room where I couldn't tell where the light was coming from. It was silent as a grave, and there were these books and figurines all over the floor. But any time I tried to look at one, it was just blurry gibberish. And the only furniture was an armchair, I ventured. I became vaguely aware that my heart was racing and I was clenching my beer way too hard. Huh, you're damn right, he said. Anyway, so it was facing away from me so I couldn't see who was in it, but I just had this feeling that the man in the Letling room was sitting in that chair. I knew he was there and he was the answer to all of it. Not just the Carganians, but everything that's happened that we don't know why. He didn't say anything, I didn't see him, but that's okay. I found out everything I've always wanted to know. He paused, ordered another drink, then turned to me, seeing the look on my face. Say, how'd you know about the armchair? Have you seen the Letling room too? I knew someone who did, my drunk brain managed to stutter out. She told me about it once. Oh, he chuckled. Well, good for her. She's dead, I said quietly. Ross's face fell. Well, I'm truly sorry to hear that, he said. He pushed his stool back and stood up. Anyhow, I'd best be going. I'm leaving early tomorrow. Have a good evening. Wait, I said. You're just walking away from, what, 40 years as an archaeologist because you hallucinated some weirdo in a chair? Giving up on your life's work? I told you, he said. I've just finished my life's work. And with that, he was gone. I couldn't sleep that night. After a few hours of tossing and turning, I gave up and sat in my study thinking until the sun rose and my wife Sarah brought coffee. Two seemingly random people across the country who saw the same eerie vision described it the same, and spoke of the man in the Letling room. One quit her job, fell into a deep depression, and killed herself. One quit his job, seemed to be in bright spirits, and wasn't dead. At least not yet. There had to be a connection. There always was. I pulled every stop, called in every favor I had, spent weeks trying to find any connection between these two people, putting all my other cases on the back burner. But there was nothing. No sign either had ever posted about the Letling room online. No sign they'd ever exchanged private correspondence or even knew each other. Two people had genuinely seen the Letling room, completely independently of each other, then uprooted their lives because of the mysterious man in the Letling room, whom neither of them saw but insisted was real. If there were two, perhaps there would be others. I turned all my energy to scouring the country and even the world for more people who saw the Letling room. My work suffered greatly for this, and in a few short months I was fired from my firm. Sarah, sweet and supportive to a fault, hugged me, gave me a gentle kiss, and assured me that we'd get through this together, even took a second job to make ends meet. With her taking care of us, I continued my work. My true work, my real calling, finding the man in the Letling room. And I made real progress. I did track down a number of other people who'd seen the Letling room. My notes and diagrams and photos filled every wall of my study, and slowly I began to piece together patterns. I was pretty good at that, you see. It's a big part of why I ended up as a PI. No one ever says they've actually been to the Letling room or even know where it is. They just see it in dreams and visions, or simply inexplicably know about it without ever having been told by anyone, and are always alone, except for that mysterious presence in the chair that they cannot see. They always describe the exact same thing and always know it as the Letling room, even if they have never heard of it before and never seen or heard that name. It doesn't even matter what language they speak. It's always the Letling room. Believe me, I should know. I even interviewed entirely through Google Translate a despondent former mathematician in Uzbekistan who had burned his life's work, dismissing it as trivial and flawed, broken proofs, and turned to herding goats in the mountains, and even he called it the Letling room and referred to that presence as the man in the Letling room, and said he was the true answer to all his conjectures, and he no longer felt the need to study mathematics. Described that damn room exactly the same as everyone else too. But not just anyone knows of the Letling room. Those who have seen it are those who obsessively study the deepest mysteries and the hardest questions known to humanity in many different fields, almost always truly brilliant luminaries, who have devoted their lives to knowledge and made sacrifices and difficult choices to be where they are. Those who have embraced their obsession and become one with it. That is their typical profile. Yet after they see the Letling room, they inevitably cease their work and stop seeking to understand the universe. They quietly feel in their hearts that this truly is what the answers they seek all boil down to. Some, like Ross the archaeologist, give up the pursuit of knowledge and exaltation because they believe that all their questions have been answered, and that answer is the man in the Letling room. Some give up out of despair, feeling that they will never find an answer other than simply the man in the Letling room. And some give up out of sheer weariness or fear or many other reasons, but invariably those who see the Letling room in their mind's eye have made their final contribution to the tapestry of human knowledge. Many people do kill themselves as a result, perhaps a quarter of those who have seen it. But not everyone dies or is even directly harmed by their experience. It depends a lot on their personality. But one thing is constant. When they see the Letling room and feel the presence of the man in the Letling room, they forever abandon the pursuit of knowledge that once drove every fiber of their being. In spite of these successes, I never drew any closer to my ultimate goal, to find out where is the Letling room and who is the man in the Letling room. And I must admit, I was far from the best husband during those years. While Sarah worked long hours, waitressing by day and working in a warehouse at night, I was holed up in my office all day and well into the night, searching for clues, or else hitting the road to investigate witnesses of the Letling room and their families and friends. And when she was home, I was always either wrapped up in this great mystery or sound asleep in my office chair, or scarfing down a meal before racing back to my office. And she too started to grow cold and distant in turn. I think on some level I must have seen the signs. She stopped massaging my shoulders, stopped bringing coffee in the mornings, stopped calling me my love. Somewhere along the line, there was a last time we slept together, a last kiss, a last meal we shared together. If I hadn't noticed any of those, perhaps I could have noticed her crying herself to sleep alone in our bed, or the open tab on her phone with a Google search for divorce lawyers. Perhaps I could have realized that she was, understandably, coming to resent me, suffering through long hours of backbreaking labor while I obsessed over some strange mystery instead of working as most people understand it, that with my long hours locked in the study until late into the night, and my constant random trips to interview witnesses, she would start to think there was another woman, or perhaps even several. But I brushed it all off, for solving this mystery, finding the man in the Letling room and putting a stop to whatever he was doing to people was more important than work, more important than love. It all came to a head one night 3 years ago, around 2 a.m. I was expecting a call from a lead, the daughter of a German neurologist who had woken up one night raving about the hard problem of consciousness and der Mann im Letling Zimmer. He was now missing, presumed dead. But I had dozed off, and I suppose Sarah had heard the buzz of my phone and pounced on it, and seen the WhatsApp photo of my lead. A blonde, busty 20-something. Sarah had grimly marched into my study, barely holding back tears, and shaken me awake, thrusting the phone in my face without a word. I blearily glanced at her face, stroking my beard. It had grown unkempt and scraggly in the 3 years since I was fired, and tried to devise the most optimal response. "I know how it looks, but don't worry," I said at last. "She's just a lead. I think she might know someone who has more info on the man in the Letling room." Sarah reacted faster than I could have expected, dropping my phone with a clatter and slapping me in the face. It hurt more than it logically should have, and not just physically. In that moment, it felt more like she'd slapped my soul. "Man in the Letling room, my ass. More like the woman in your hotel room," she snapped. I sighed heavily, took a sip of lukewarm coffee, and glanced at a case report, some Harvard philosopher who'd abruptly walked away from his job to start a new life in South America. "Sarah, I promise I'd never. You know me," I said softly. "No, I don't, Jason, not anymore," she retorted. She sank to the floor, her back to the wall, no longer able to hold the tears in. "You know, it was my birthday today, and you didn't even say anything. After everything I've done for you, the 3 years I've stood by your side while you did fuck all and didn't even give a shit about me. Let me work myself to the bone. Weren't even there when my grandma died. And this is how you fucking repay me." I'm so sorry," I said at last. "And, happy birthday." "You have to go. Get out," Sarah said shakily. She locked herself in the bedroom the next day while I packed my things, didn't respond when I said goodbye through the door. I spent the night in some seedy motel, staring at the ceiling tiles and fantasizing about crashing through the wall of the Letling room, tipping over that stupid chair, and beating the shit out of the man in the Letling room, whoever or whatever he was. It was clear there was only one path forward now, and that was to continue my calling with redoubled energy. So that's exactly what I did, wandering from place to place to investigate whatever leads came up and working odd jobs for spare cash. Sometimes couch surfing, sometimes sleeping out of my car, sometimes stopping by a random library to add info to my ever-growing Google Drive filled with profiles of those who have seen the Letling room. There must have been hundreds of witnesses by that point at the very least. I was starting to find more and more of them. I don't know if that's because I was getting better and better at finding them. To be fair, I was, but I still had my fair share of false positives. Or if more people are actually starting to encounter the man in the Letling room. But I have noticed that knowing about him tends to increase the probability that one will eventually, well, not visit. For I increasingly don't think it's a place you can find on a map, but somehow have a mental picture and memory of the Letling room and feel the mysterious presence in that chair. At least for those with the risk factors, The thirst to answer hard questions, and the drive to sacrifice it all for the answers. Some of the living witnesses have speculated about the nature of the man in the Letling room. Some say he's God. Some say he goes far beyond that. Some say he wants to hurt humanity. Some say he wants to help. Some say he simply doesn't care. Some swear that if they could somehow just go to that room for real and look at that armchair, that it would be empty. But for most, he's simply the man in the Letling room. About a year ago, I was at a rest stop on some godforsaken stretch of highway somewhere in the Midwest, with nothing but the highway, thinly populated with trucks, slicing rulers straight across endless flat fields that stretched as far as the eye could see. The bitter cold sliced right through my thrift store coat, too thin to provide any real protection, and flurries drifted in the air. I had just interviewed a fellow disgraced PI, now slowly drinking himself to death in a trailer in the middle of nowhere, who'd insisted that the man in the Letling room was responsible for every case he'd ever failed to crack, and was on my way to investigate a dead quantum physicist in Boulder, apparently a suicide, and speak with his family. It was getting towards sunset, and I'd been driving across past these never-ending fields all day, so I figured I would pull over and take a nap before continuing. And as I ate my ham and cheese sandwich and sipped my coffee, staring morosely into the distant fields, I suddenly remembered something. Sitting there in that rest stop out of nowhere, I remembered seeing the Letling room. I don't know when or how, but the memory was just as vivid as if it had been yesterday, and I remembered seeing it myself, not just imagining it from other people's descriptions of it. It was like all the hundreds of people had described it. A small room dimly lit from an unknown source with piles of books and ornaments on the floor, and that mysterious armchair facing away from me because of course it fucking was. I somehow remembered picking up one of those books, only for the contents to melt away to an illegible blur as soon as I focused on them. I remembered realizing with absolute certainty that the man in the Letling room, whoever or whatever he was, sat in that armchair. I remembered hurling the book at the back of the chair in a fit of rage, and that the man in the Letling room did not react in any way whatsoever, nor was the absolute silence broken as the book hit the chair and fell to the floor. I remembered wanting to step forward and see what was in the chair, and that was all that I remembered of my experience with the Letling room, regardless of whenever and wherever it may have been, or if it even truly happened. But it was enough. In that moment in the rest stop, I was absolutely unshakably certain that this was as good as it was ever going to get. That this was the closest I would ever come to an answer, no matter how much I tried, no matter how hard I thought, no matter how much evidence I gathered. This was it. The man in the Letling room is the explanation for all that is inexplicable, and the answer to all that is unanswerable. That's all. A pity I wasted all these years and ruined my life, only to arrive at that conclusion. That night I burned all of my case files in an empty field. There was no more need for them. That revelation in that random rest stop was the end of the line, the furthest I or anyone else was ever going to get towards solving the mystery. I knew that with absolute confidence from the moment I felt the presence of the man in the Letling room. The next morning, I stopped in the first town I came across and settled down there. It's been a year since that fateful day. I'm doing all right now, I suppose. I mostly keep to myself now, eking out a living flipping burgers in this random town. Sometimes I think about my old line of work or about trying to track down Sarah to apologize and explain myself. But what's the point? I and countless others have tried and failed to search for answers and explanations to the deepest mysteries time and again. It's not worth it. The only thing you'll ever find is the man in the Letling room. I've always been a night owl, never one to shy away from the darkness. So when I moved to the small town of Ravenshire, I didn't think twice about the fact that the streets seemed to be alive and kicking at all hours of the night. At first, I just assumed it was a town that liked to party. But as the days went by, I started to notice something strange. People weren't just out and about at night. They seemed to be watching. They'd stand in their front yards, staring out at the street with an unnerving intensity, and they never seemed to blink. At first, I tried to brush it off as small-town paranoia. But as the nights wore on, I started to feel a creeping sense of unease. It was as if the entire town was waiting for something, watching for some sign or signal that I couldn't quite grasp. I tried to talk to my neighbors to ask them what was going on, but they just smiled and nodded, their eyes glinting with a knowing light. It was as if they were all in on some secret joke, and I was the only one who didn't get it. As the nights wore on, I started to feel like I was losing my mind. I'd lie awake in bed, listening to the sounds of the town outside my window. People would walk by, their footsteps echoing off the pavement, and they'd always seem to be watching. I started to wonder if I was the only one who slept at night, if the entire town was somehow awake. And what did they do all night long? What were they watching for? I knew I had to get to the bottom of it. So one night I decided to sneak out and do some investigating. I crept through the streets, trying to avoid detection. But it seemed like every time I turned a corner I'd run into someone who was watching. They'd smile and nod, their eyes glinting with that same knowing light, and I'd feel a shiver run down my spine. What did they want? What were they waiting for? I stumbled upon a small park on the outskirts of town, and that's when I saw it. A group of people standing in a circle and staring up at the sky. They seemed to be waiting. I crept closer, trying not to be seen, and that's when I heard it. A low humming noise, like the sound of 1,000 bees buzzing in unison. It seemed to be coming from everywhere. Suddenly, the group of people turned to face me, and I saw that they were all different. Their skin seemed to shift and ripple like the surface of water. Their eyes glowed with an otherworldly light. I realized in that moment that the residents of Ravenshire weren't human. They were something else, something ancient and alien. I turned and ran, not stopping until I was back in my bed, the covers pulled up to my neck. I lay there, listening to the sounds of the town outside my window, and I knew that I had to get out of there before they discovered that I knew their secret. But as I lay there, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I'd hear footsteps outside my window, and I'd see shadows moving out of the corner of my eye. I knew I had to be careful, that I couldn't let them know that I knew the truth. I started to make plans to leave, to pack up my belongings and get out of Ravenshire as quickly and quietly as possible. But as I went about my daily routine, I couldn't help but feel like I was being herded towards some unknown fate. Everywhere I went, I'd see the residents of Ravenshire watching me, their eyes glinting with that same knowing light. I'd try to avoid them, to duck into alleys and side streets, but they'd always seem to be one step ahead of me. I knew I had to get out of there before it was too late. I packed my bags and made my way to the outskirts of town, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew I'd have to move quickly to get as far away from Ravenshire as possible before they realized what was happening. As I walked, I could feel their eyes on me, watching me from the shadows. I knew I'd have to be careful that I couldn't let them catch me. I quickened my pace, my heart racing with anticipation. And then, just as I was about to reach the edge of town, I heard it. A low humming noise, like the sound of 1,000 bees buzzing in unison. It seemed to be coming from everywhere. I knew I had to keep moving to get as far away from Ravenshire as possible. I broke into a run, my feet pounding the pavement as I desperately tried to escape the clutches of the town's sinister residents. As I ran, the humming noise grew louder, and I could feel the air vibrating with an otherworldly energy. I didn't dare look back, fearing what I might see. Instead, I kept my eyes fixed on the horizon, my heart pounding in my chest. I finally reached the edge of town, and I didn't stop running until I was sure I'd left Ravenshire behind. I slowed to a stop, gasping for breath, and looked back at the town I'd just escaped. The streets were empty, the houses dark and silent, but I knew that was just a facade. I knew that the residents of Ravenshire were still watching, still waiting, and I knew that I'd never be able to go back. I turned and walked away, leaving Ravenshire to its secrets. I didn't know where I was going or what lay ahead, but I knew I had to keep moving to get as far away from that accursed town as possible. As I walked, the humming noise faded into the distance, and I began to feel a sense of relief wash over me. I'd escaped Ravenshire, and I was alive. But as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the road, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I looked over my shoulder, but there was no one there. I quickened my pace, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew I had to keep moving to find a place to hide before nightfall. And then, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, I saw it. A motel, its neon sign glowing like a beacon in the darkness. I stumbled towards it, my legs aching with exhaustion. I pushed open the door and stepped inside. The clerk looked up at me, his eyes narrowing as he took in my disheveled appearance. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice gruff. I nodded, trying to catch my breath. "I need a room," I said, my voice shaking. The clerk raised an eyebrow, but he nodded and handed me a key. Room 17, he said. You're lucky we had a vacancy. I took the key and stumbled towards the room. I locked the door behind me and collapsed onto the bed. I lay there listening to the sounds of the motel, the hum of the air conditioner, the creak of the bed, and I knew I was safe, at least for the night. But as I drifted off to sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that the residents of Ravenshire were still out there waiting for me. And I knew that I'd never be able to go back, that I'd have to keep running, forever trapped in a nightmare of my own making.